Welcome to Savage Harry. Today's adventure. What if inheritance test revealed Harry was the last heir of the Slaughter-Mage bloodline? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. A goblins noticed the afternoon at Privet Drive smelled of cut grass and burnt sausage, and Harry Potter, 8 years old, was bleeding from a split lip he had not earned. Dudley stood 3 paces off with 2 boys who had not yet learned how to be ashamed of themselves. The plastic climbing frame at the rear of the playground threw a thin shadow over the sand. Harry's glasses lay in 2 pieces by his shoe. His ribs were tender where Dudley had used a knee. He did not cry. Crying brought more. He held still instead, the way a small animal holds still, and watched Dudley's mouth shape another insult, and inside him something old turned over in its sleep. What happened next he could not have described later, not with any of the words an 8-year-old owns. There was a feeling like a held breath finally letting go, and a feeling like a door he hadn't known was locked sliding back. The air around him cooled. The shadow under the climbing frame lengthened against the grain of the sun. Dudley's mouth was open, and then Dudley was not where Dudley had been. Dudley was 4 feet up and to the left, suspended in midair, kicking, weeping in a key Harry had never heard him use. The 2 friends fled with the speed of small things that have remembered they are small. Dudley hung where the air had decided to put him for the space of 3 breaths, then dropped onto the sand with the gracelessness of something the world has lost interest in. Harry stood without moving. His hands felt cold. The skin at his wrist itched, in a fine line that traced something he did not know the shape of. Aunt Petunia found her son first, then Harry. She did not scream. Petunia's screams were reserved for things she could blame on outsiders. This had the shape of something she had spent a decade pretending was not in her house. Her mouth thinned to a wire. She did not look at Harry as she dragged Dudley to his feet. She looked above him, past him, at a point in the air that Harry, turning his head, could not find. "You will not," she said very quietly, "speak of this to anyone." "I didn't," he began. "I said you will not." She walked Dudley back across the lawn. Harry collected the pieces of his glasses and waited for the sky to break. The sky did not break. The sky did the entirely worse thing of remaining ordinary. In the house, Vernon's voice rose and fell behind the kitchen door for an hour. Dudley got pudding. Harry got the cupboard. The cupboard was a familiar country and he knew the small mercies of it. The seam in the wallpaper where his thumb had worn a notch over the years, the way the light bulb buzzed if you tapped the wall in the right place, the slat under the cot that, if you pressed it the wrong way, snagged the back of your knee. He pressed it now and let it sting. The sting was something to do. He turned his face to the wall and tried to think backwards through the playground. The cool air, the held breath, the shadow that had not behaved. He had done it. He knew he had done it. He had been doing it for years, in smaller ways. The glass that did not fall when the broom knocked it. The tie that had loosened itself the day Mrs. Figg's neighbor had tried to pull him by it. The hair that had come back overnight after Aunt Petunia had cut it down to skin. He had cataloging for a teacher, and the catalog had grown. It was 3 days later when the woman came. She arrived at the door in tartan and good leather shoes, and did not knock so much as announce by knocking. Aunt Petunia opened the door because Aunt Petunia had heard the knock, and intended to refuse whatever was on the other side. Then she saw the woman's face, and the refusal died in her throat. "You are Petunia Dursley," the woman said. It was not a question. "Yes. My name is Minerva McGonagall. We have not met. I knew your sister. I am here about the boy." Petunia's hand went to her own throat. He is 8. He is alive. He has, I am told, recently and without warning lifted his cousin into the air." The hallway behind Petunia was suddenly silent in the particular way of a house in which all eavesdroppers have ceased to breathe. "Are you?" Petunia tried. "I am exactly what you think I am. May I come in, please? I would prefer to do this sitting down." In the parlor, McGonagall sat with her ankles crossed and her hands folded over a black leather case. Harry, summoned, stood at the door and waited to be told what he had done wrong. "Sit, Mr. Potter," McGonagall said. He sat. She did not waste words. She told him in plain language what he was and what his parents had been, and what had happened on a Halloween night 7 years ago. She did not ornament it. She did not soften. She watched him through the whole of it the way a teacher watches a student receiving the result of an examination they had not realized they had taken. When she was done, Harry sat very still and said, "All right, all right. Yes, ma'am." Aunt Petunia made a noise that was not quite a laugh. "And his outburst," Petunia said. The floating." "Common," McGonagall said. "Untrained children of our kind do it when frightened or angry. Less common in one this controlled. I would like to take him into London tomorrow. There is a procedure. A standard one for orphaned children of established families. An inheritance test at the bank. It tells us as much as can be told what was passed to him. The vaults, the properties, any titles or estates, any obligations. And then you bring him back," Petunia said. The flatness of it was not a question. "I bring him back." Petunia's mouth worked. She said with an effort that was visible at the corners of her eyes, "Will you tell him about what, Mrs. Dursley? About what Lily was?" McGonagall's expression did not move, but the room did. "I will tell him what he is. I will tell him what is in the vault. Beyond that I will leave him to his own discoveries, as is customary. The school will teach him in due course." "Good," Petunia said and looked away. In the morning the woman appeared again in a long dark coat, and she took Harry's hand in her own gloved one, and the world bent. Apparating was not, Harry decided afterwards, painful. It was that a part of him which had never previously been required to fold had been folded, and resented being unfolded again. He stood on a curb in a long crooked street, blinking, while a woman with a basket of toads waited to cross. McGonagall did not give him time to gawk. She walked him through the crowd, past a wand shop and an apothecary and a shop in which something behind the glass was wet, and stopped at the foot of a building made of pale stone that did not want to be looked at directly. Above the doors, words had been cut into the stone in a script that did not match any of the letters on the rest of the street. "Gringotts," McGonagall said. "The Wizard Bank. The Goblins keep it. Mind your manners. Do not stare." He did not stare. Or he stared, but in a way he had taught himself in Privet Drive, which was the way of looking at a thing without ever putting your eyes directly on it. The hall inside was high and cold. Goblins sat at lecterns the height of small trees and worked. Coins were counted. Quills moved. The light was the light of old halls, which had a quality of patience. Harry's split lip had healed, but his ribs still ached, and he stood beside the witch with his hands behind his back the way he had been taught to stand when he wished not to be noticed. McGonagall approached a senior teller who lifted his eyes from a parchment. "An inheritance test," she said, "for James Potter's son." The teller, small-lined, with eyes the color of unminted copper, did not answer immediately. He looked very deliberately at Harry. He looked at Harry the way an antiques dealer looks at a piece of furniture that has just been carried in off the street, and then again, a second time, the way the same dealer looks at it when something behind the dust has caught his eye. Then he stood. "This way," he said, in a voice that suggested a much older man wearing a much younger body. "Madam McGonagall, you will accompany." He led them out of the hall, down a corridor, then down another, and then to a door that was not a door so much as a hinge holding a slab of stone shut. The teller pressed his palm to the stone. The stone considered him and remembered him and slid aside. The room beyond was small and lit by no lamp Harry could see. The light was simply present, as if the room had decided to be visible. In the center was a stone basin on a stone plinth, and on the plinth was carved a long script that was not English and was not Latin and might not have been a human language at all. "Sit," the teller said. Place your hand here, palm down. The point will know what to do. Harry placed his hand. The stone under his palm was the temperature of nothing. The script began, very faintly, to glow. A second goblin had entered behind them. This one was older still, robed in dark gray edged with iron, and he carried a small instrument that did not look like a needle and behaved like one. He approached Harry with a courtesy that did not feel theatrical. "Forgive the touch, young master," the goblin said. "One drop, no more." Harry's hand did not move. He had been taught not to flinch where he was being touched on purpose. The point came down. There was no sting, only the smallest possible cold, as if a single snowflake had landed on his vein. The drop welled dark, and the teller caught it on a thin silver leaf and laid the leaf in the basin. What happened then, Harry would remember later in fragments. The blood did not beat. The blood did not run. The blood rose in the basin like ink lifted on a fingertip from a page, and arranged itself into letters that were the same letters as on the plinth, and there were lines and lines of them, and the room did something it had not done since they entered, which was grow warm. The teller, who had begun to read, stopped reading. The teller's hand went flat against the rim of the basin. He looked at the older goblin behind him. The older goblin's mouth did the thing a mouth does when it has been waiting a very long time and is no longer required to. "Send word," the older goblin said. "Word to whom?" McGonagall said. "To the king," said the older goblin. He looked at Harry with a kind of attention that Harry had never had directed at him. "Forgive me, young master. We must ask you to remain in this room a little while. You have done nothing wrong, on the contrary." McGonagall set her hand on the back of Harry's chair. "Loremaster," she said, because the word had risen in her, apparently before she had decided to use it. "What does it say?" The older goblin, the loremaster, turned to her with a face he had not shown her in the hall. There was respect in it. There was also something Harry, 8 years old, could not name, which was the look of a man who has just been handed back something he was told had burned a long time ago. "It says," the loremaster said, "that the boy is the son of James, and James of Charles, and Charles of Henry, and Henry of a great many fathers, and that one of those fathers very far down the line did a thing the ministry of his age outlawed and the rest of us did not. It says that the line we were told had ended did not end. It says that the heir is in this room." McGonagall sat down. She did not appear to mean to. "The Slaughter-Mages," she said. "That word, yes," said the loremaster. She closed her eyes for one breath. She opened them. "You are certain. The basin is certain. The basin has been certain in this room for 900 years. I would not insult it by doubting today." A bell rang somewhere very deep in the building. The kind of bell rung in a place that does not ring bells for small things. McGonagall did not speak. She was a woman who had spent a long life knowing what to say in difficult rooms, and she was, for one of the few times Harry would ever see, plainly waiting to be told. The king came an hour later, and the hour was not boredom, and the hour was not waiting. The hour was the room. The room had decided to be a place where someone of consequence would be received, and it had begun, in small ways Harry could feel without being able to point at any of them, to dress itself for the visit. The stone underfoot warmed half a degree. The light shifted a fraction further from gray toward the color of fresh bronze. The basin, which had emptied, refilled itself from a source Harry could not see. Goblin King Ragnarok did not stoop to enter. He simply was small enough not to need to, and large enough that you understood, looking at him, that smallness had been a choice his line had made and could unmake. He wore a circlet of iron that had at some point been hammered out of a sword. He had eyes the color of well water at the bottom of a deep well. He looked at Harry for a long time. Harry, who had spent 8 years learning how to be looked at by people who were not pleased with him, found he could not look away from this man and was not sure he wanted to. "Stand, please," Ragnarok said. His voice did not rise. The room rose to meet it. Harry stood. Ragnock crossed to him. He stopped one full pace away, which was the polite distance. He inclined his head. Not a bow, a Goblin King does not bow to a child, but an inclination of the kind one gives to a thing one had once given up on seeing again. Heir of the line, he said. Harry did not know what to say. He said, because his aunt had drilled it into him by repetition and pain, sir. Ragnock smiled. There was iron in the smile, but it was not for Harry. You will not understand much of what I am about to say, he said. You will understand the shape of it. The shape is the important part. Listen, Harry Potter. He sat then on a chair that had not been in the room a moment before and was in it now. The lore master stood at his right hand. McGonagall stood at the side, very upright, very pale, doing what teachers of her sort do when they realize the lesson has changed under them and they will have to take notes. There was once, said Ragnock, an order of your people, not wizards as you understand the word now, not aurors, older. They were the ones to whom the dark things were given, the murderers of children, the conjurers who had unbound something they could not put back, the witch who had made a thing of her husband's bones. When the courts of your kind ran out of mercy and ran out of cells, those who remained were given to this order. The order took the work. The order did the work. There is a way of doing it. There is a right. There is a discipline. There is precision. The order called itself by many names. The wizards of the later age, when they came to be afraid of it, called it Slaughter-Mage. Harry's hand, on the edge of the basin, did not tremble. He noticed that distantly and filed it. In the year 1498, Ragnock continued, by your calendar, the ministry of your kind outlawed the order. They had decided in their wisdom that the work would now be done by the aurors, who would be cleaner, and by Azkaban, which would be cheaper. They drove the order underground. They burned the books. They struck the names from the records. By the year 1543, the last open practitioner was dead. The line, however, the line is a different thing from the order. The line is in the blood. The line does not go to vote in the ministry. The line does not consult the law. The line lay down in the families it had married into and waited. The Potter family, among others, kept it. The Potter family has known off and on. The Potter family has, more often than not, chosen not to know. He looked at Harry. He looked at Harry with all of the attention a king has when he means it. You are the last of that line that we can find. You are 8 years old. You have today, in a basin 900 years old, written your name in a hand 400 years dead. The Goblin Nation has waited for that hand. We do not propose to wait further. Harry, who did not know what was being offered him, said, Sir, we propose, Ragnock said, to teach you, not in your school. The ministry would not permit it. We are not asking the ministry. In summers, in holidays, quietly, under the loremaster and others. There is a discipline that goes with this line. It is not pleasant. It is not for children. But you, Harry Potter, are no longer permitted to be a child only. You are the heir of an order outlawed in living memory. If you do not learn what is in you will, in time, learn itself, and the learning will be uglier. Harry looked at the basin. The letters were fading. They did not seem to be in a hurry. He thought very carefully about Dudley 4 feet off the ground. He said, I would like to learn, sir. Ragnock inclined his head again. This time it was a fraction lower. Then it is agreed, he said. Madam McGonagall, your Majesty, you will convey to the headmaster of Hogwarts that the boy is, from this hour, under the tutelage of the Goblin Nation in the matter of his ancestral discipline. You will convey to him that this tutelage is non-negotiable. You will convey to him that any attempt to obstruct, monitor, or interfere with the tutelage will be treated, by the nation, as a breach of treaty. You will convey, finally, that we are content to have him attend his school in due course, on the calendar your kind keeps. We are not in the business of stealing children. We are in the business of returning them to themselves. McGonagall's lips were a thin line. inclined her head an exact degree. "I will convey it," she said. "And the boy's residence?" the loremaster asked. "Stays as it is during the school year," Ragnock said. "We will not give the ministry cause. Summers, however," and his eyes flicked fractionally towards Harry, "summers are ours." He stood. The room understood that the audience was concluded. The loremaster reached into his sleeve and produced a small object on a chain, a token of iron no larger than a thumbnail etched with a single mark. He pressed it into Harry's hand. "Wear this," the loremaster said. "Hide it from those who would object. When the time comes, it will tell you. When the time comes, it will bring you to us." Harry closed his fingers around the token. The iron was warm in a way iron has no business being. "Sir," he said, to Ragnock this time, looking up at the king as honestly as he had ever looked at anyone. Why me? Why is it me?" Ragnock considered him. "You did not ask for it," the king said. "You did not choose it. You were given it by men who never spoke their names to you and a woman who held the door against the dark for you when you were a year old. The line is not a reward, Harry Potter. The line is a debt. The debt is owed to the dead. We are going to teach you how to pay it. Do you understand?" "No, sir," Harry said. "Good," said Ragnock. "If you had said yes, I would have known you were lying." There was, before they left, a single further moment of which Harry would never speak in later years, not because he had been told not to, but because he found, when he tried, that the words sat on him wrong. The loremaster at the door paused. He took Harry's wrist gently, as he had taken the drop, and turned the inside of it to the light. He looked with eyes that knew where to look at the small, fine line under the skin of Harry's forearm. The line was the one Harry had been aware of in the playground, the one that had itched when he had lifted Dudley. The loremaster did not touch it. He simply looked. "It has begun to surface," he said very softly to himself in a tongue not English. Then to Harry in English, "Do not be afraid of it. It does not belong to anything that wants you harmed. It belongs to you. We will in time teach it manners." He let go of Harry's wrist. He bowed, by a degree he reserved for the line in private, and turned away. The world, when McGonagall took him back through it, did not feel the same on the other side. Privet Drive was where it had been. The hedges were where they had been. The car was in the drive. The kitchen smelled of fish. Aunt Petunia opened the door and looked at him as though looking for damage and not finding it. "He is well, Mrs. Dursley," McGonagall said. "He will spend his summers from next year onward at a place I cannot name. He will attend Hogwarts at 11. Until then he will live here. I would prefer that he live here without further incident." Petunia's jaw worked. "And if there is an incident, then there will be other incidents," McGonagall said very kindly, "and I will arrange them." She left. Harry climbed the stairs to his cupboard, and inside the cupboard he took the iron token out of his pocket and held it against his chest and lay down on his cot. The token was warm. His ribs still ached. The split in his lip had healed. Above him, through the floor, he heard Aunt Petunia say a word he was not supposed to hear, and Uncle Vernon say a louder one, and then a long silence in which decisions were being arrived at without him. He turned the token in his fingers. He read, with eyes that had no business being able to read it, the mark on its face. He could not have said in English what it meant. He could have said in the language of his hand what to do with it. He held it very still, and the cupboard very faintly grew warmer. Outside, at the bottom of the garden, a fox came out of the hedge, looked at the upstairs window for a long moment and went back where it had come from. Foxes know things. Foxes had, for a moment, taken number 4 Privet Drive seriously. They would not take it seriously again for some years. In Hogwarts, in a tower above a sleeping castle, an old man at a desk was reading a letter that had arrived by a hand he did not recognize and could not trace, and the old man's hand, which had not trembled at very many things in a long life, trembled now. He read the letter twice. He set it down. He went to the window and looked out at the grounds. What? Albus Dumbledore said to no one but the knight. The knight had no answer for him. The knight had been waiting 400 years to have no answer for him. He sat. He read the letter a third time. He took from a drawer he kept locked a thin book bound in unmarked leather, and he turned its pages by candlelight until he came to a page he had not turned to since he was 23, and his master Flamel had warned him away from it. The page bore a single sigil, drawn in a hand that had been dead before Dumbledore's grandfather's grandfather had been born. The sigil matched exactly the small mark on the lower corner of the letter on his desk. He closed the book. He held his hand flat over it, very still, for the length of 3 breaths. He had known, distantly, that the Potter line carried something. He had known it the way one knows there is a buried stream under a meadow, by the way the grass grew greener in a particular hollow, by the way the cattle did not, in certain seasons, cross. He had not known it carried this. He had not been told. He had not, when James was a boy, asked. He thought now, with the precise honesty old men can sometimes manage at midnight, that perhaps he had not asked because some part of him had not wished to be answered. He looked at the letter again. There were 3 lines on it in plain Latin script in Goblin formal hand. The line we were told had ended did not end. The heir is found. The nation has resumed tutelage. Inform the ministry at your discretion. It was signed simply Ragnarok. Below his window in the dark, Hogwarts breathed. The lake turned slowly in its bed. In a tower he could not see from where he stood, a portrait of an old headmaster, Phineas Nigellus, who had been alive in 1543 and had voted in chambers for the suppression of the order, sat very still in his frame and did not, when Dumbledore later passed his portrait on the stairs, meet his eyes. Dumbledore did not that night sleep. He went, after some hours, down the spiral stair from his office to the corridor of portraits that lined the headmaster's gallery, and he stopped, deliberately, in front of Phineas Nigellus Black. The portrait had its eyes closed. The portrait had its eyes closed in the particular way of a man pretending to be asleep. Phineas, Dumbledore said. Phineas did not open his eyes. Phineas, you voted in 1543 for the suppression of the order. I have your name in the chamber records. I am not asking you to apologize for it. I am asking you to tell me what they told you before you voted. Phineas opened one eye. His mouth, painted in oil 2 centuries before, was nevertheless capable of a particular contempt. They told us, Phineas said, that the order had grown too proud. They told us that the Aurors were enough. They told us that the right was an embarrassment to the modern profession. We had had a century of duels and bonded wands, and we did not wish to be reminded that there had ever been a kind of magic that did not require either. We voted to suppress. We did not vote to extinguish. There is a difference. The Goblin Nation marked the difference. We did not. The Potter line was the last of the practicing families. They had married out by then. They were, in the chamber, asked to surrender any inherited texts. They surrendered, I am told, 3 texts. They retained, I am told, 4. They were the Potters. They were polite about it. We did not press. You did not press. Albus, said Phineas, opening the other eye, if you had wanted to press, you should have done so when there was a boy of that line in your 5th year by the name of James. You did not. Do not blame me, who has been dead 200 years, for an omission of yours which is 40. Dumbledore did not answer. He stood for some time in front of the portrait, and the portrait, having said the thing it had wished to say, closed its eyes again and went apparently back to sleep. He returned to his office. He did not write to the ministry. He did not, that night, write to anyone. He sat at his window and watched the lake until the lake stopped reflecting the moon and began reflecting the sky behind the moon. In the morning, in the corridor outside the staff room, he stopped Severus Snape, who had heard nothing because nothing had been said aloud, and who nevertheless turned his head with the alertness of a man who has felt a draught from a door no one had opened. Severus, Dumbledore said, in the library of your house when you were a boy, do you recall a particular thin volume, bound in unmarked leather with no title on the spine? Snape's face did not change. Snape's face was capable of not changing about a great many things. I recall, Snape said, many volumes. This one would have a sigil on the first page, a single mark drawn in red ink. There was a silence. Snape's eyes, when they came back to Dumbledore's, were the color of cold tea. That book, he said, was burnt, Headmaster, in the year I was 13. My father saw fit to burn it because my mother had said its name aloud at table. I do not know where she had it. I do not know where she got it. I do not know why you are asking me about it today. Curiosity, Dumbledore said mildly. With respect, Headmaster, you do not, in my experience, indulge it. Dumbledore inclined his head. Snape, after a moment, walked on. Dumbledore watched him go, and noted, as he had noted on several previous mornings without saying so, that there were in the world 2 or 3 people who had been raised within reach of certain old books, and that he might have to speak to them eventually, and that he was not yet ready to. 3 days later, on the morning the Dursleys took Dudley to be measured for new school trousers, Harry was left in the house. He had been left in the house many times. He had that morning no particular task. He sat on the step at the bottom of the stairs and held the iron token in his fist and felt it lie warm against his palm. The kitchen tap, which Aunt Petunia had been complaining about for a week, was dripping. It had dripped over the course of the morning, the rhythm of a slow heartbeat. Harry, without thinking, without planning, without intending, looked at the tap. He looked at it the way he had looked at Dudley on the climbing frame, which is to say, with attention and with the small, cold place in the middle of his chest that he had not had a name for. The tap stopped dripping. It did not stop because it had been turned off. It stopped because, in the seam between 2 pieces of metal inside it, a thing that had been wrong had become, all at once, right. He could not have explained how he knew this. He simply did, the way he had in the room at Gringotts, simply read. He sat for a long time on the step, listening to the silence where the dripping had been, and held the iron in his hand. This, he thought, and the thinking for the first time in his small life, had a shape, and the shape was not a question, is going to be a long road, and I am going to walk it. In Gringotts that evening, 2 hours after the boy had been returned to his aunt's house, the loremaster sat alone in the slate room beneath the bank and did the small private inventory that the night required of him. He had on his desk 3 pieces of parchment. The first was the report he would file to the Council of Elders by midnight. The second was the letter he would have delivered by Goblin courier to the headmaster of Hogwarts by morning. The third was a single sheet of his own private notes, in a hand only he could read, which he kept for working purposes and which he would, when the working was concluded, burn. The private notes read, in the formal tongue of the Order's records, "The heir is 8. The heir is small for his age, and has been beaten in a manner that has not, yet, marked the bones. The heir is observant in a way that has cost him." The heir, on entering the slate room, did not, in his stance, look at any object in the room he was not specifically directed to look at. This is, by our books, the stance of a child who has been raised in a house where looking at any object in the room without being directed to may be punished. The heir has the line on his right forearm. The line has begun to surface. The line is, by our measurements, of an active strain. The line on its own would not have surfaced for another decade. Something has woken it. We do not yet know what. The heir is, by initial measure, suitable for the discipline. We recommend immediate but unhurried tutelage. We recommend that the discipline be conducted in summers and holidays by the loremaster, with assistance from the Eastern Hall scholars as required. We recommend that the king's protection be formally extended to the residence at which the heir is, in school terms, kept. We recommend that the protection not be advertised. We recommend that the heir be permitted to live, in the meantime, as a small boy in a small house. The line does not need to be told, it is the line. The line, in its long history, has known. The line will conduct itself accordingly. The lore master, when he had finished writing, set down his quill. He folded the report. He sealed it. He folded the letter and addressed it and sealed it. He took the page of private notes and held it over a small flame, and the page, by the time he set it down, was a small gray curl of ash. He brushed the ash into the brazier. He wiped the table. He stood. He went down the corridor to the council chamber, where Ragnarok was already waiting in a chair he had not for some years sat in for any purpose. He is at his aunt's house, the lore master said. He is unharmed. He is. He is, by the measure of the day, also uncelebrated. The aunt is not, in her own way, a kind woman. We will, in the years to come, find that this fact has its uses. The boy will not, in his own house, develop the expectation that he is owed anything by anyone. The line does not flourish in the entitled. The line has, in its history, declined to flourish in heirs who arrived at the slate room already convinced they were owed it. Ragnarok inclined his head. He has the line. The line has surfaced. We did not wake it. The aunt did not wake it, or not directly. The cousin did, perhaps, by an action in a playground 3 days ago. We will, in time, learn the details. The details are not today the matter. What is today the matter? The matter today is that we have been given, by the substrate, a boy who, in his 8th year, lifted his cousin into the air by an effort he had not been taught. The substrate gives us such children rarely. The substrate, when it gives them to us, has its reasons. The headmaster of Hogwarts has, on his desk in his tower at this hour, the letter I have written. He will, by morning, read it. He will, by morning, also begin to wonder why the substrate has called the heir forward in this generation. He will, by his own private resources, work toward the answer. We will, by our resources, work toward the same answer. We will meet in due course at the answer. Until then, the boy is the lines. The boy is not, by treaty or by common sense, the ministries. Yes, Majesty. Sleep, Loremaster. You have ahead of you a curriculum of 12 years, and it will, if I know your habits, eat your sleep. Begin tonight. The Loremaster bowed and left. Ragnarok sat for a long time in the chair he had not, for some years, used. He did not, in those minutes, smile. He did not, however, frown. He had the look, in the quiet of the chamber, of a king who had been waiting 400 years for a particular telegram, and who had, that afternoon, received it. In the cupboard under the stairs at Privet Drive, the 8-year-old boy slept that night with his hand closed over a piece of iron, and dreamed, for the first time, of a long hall and a long table, and the names of men whom no one had spoken aloud since 1543, and the names knew him. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The Loremaster's hands the summons came on the morning of his 9th birthday, and did not arrive by owl. Harry was scraping the breakfast pan over the bin, when the iron token in his trouser pocket warmed against his thigh, until he was forced, in the middle of the kitchen, to take it out and look at it. A symbol he had not seen on it before was burning very quietly on its face, a symbol that meant come. He went into the back garden ostensibly to take out the rubbish. He stepped over the low hedge at the rear. Behind the hedge was the gravel path along the row of garages, and on the gravel path was a goblin in dark gray edged with iron, standing as if he had been standing there a long time and was patient. "Young master," the Loremaster said, "it is time. You will not be missed for some weeks. I have arranged a small charm at the house. Your aunt will believe you have been at a summer school in Devon. Are you ready?" Harry had not been told he would be ready. He had not been told he would not. He had packed nothing because he had nothing to pack. "Yes, sir," he said. The Loremaster nodded, as if the answer had been precisely the right one, and took his wrist, and the gravel path was not where it had been. Where it had been was a low chamber under Gringotts that did not, in any of the maps available to the ministry, exist. The stone was older than the bank above it. The lamps were brass and did not flicker. The floor was a circle of black slate. Around the circle, at the cardinal points, stood 4 blocks of pale stone, hip-high to a goblin, waist-high to a child. They had been worn smooth by hands. The hands had stopped touching them 400 years ago, but the stone had not forgotten. "This is the practice room of the line," the loremaster said. "It has been swept clean every fortnight since the suppression. The nation did not wish it to fall to dust. The nation is, on the matter of dust, more conservative than your kind. Sit." Harry sat where indicated, cross-legged, on a square of black wool laid on the slate. The loremaster sat opposite him. He folded his hands. He was, Harry would learn over the next months, a man who did very little that he did not mean. "Before I teach you anything," the loremaster said, "I am going to tell you what we are not doing here. We are not training a duelist. There are 63 competent duelists in your country at this moment. The world does not require a 64th. We are not training a soldier. Soldiers operate in numbers, you are one. We are not training an assassin. Assassins lie about what they do. We are training, young master, a practitioner of a discipline whose work is the formal removal from the world of the living of those whom the world of the living has formally judged it cannot afford to keep. There are very particular reasons for the difference between this work and the other 3. The first reason is that all 4 of the kinds I have just named will, in the course of their work, kill people. The practitioner of our discipline will kill people very rarely, perhaps never. He will, however, possess at all times the means to do it without ornament, without slippage, and without doubt. Possessing the means is what permits him not to use it. Do you follow? No, sir. Good, said the loremaster. I will repeat it again in a year. You will follow it then. Now the breath. He spent the first 3 days of Harry's tutelage on the breath. The breath was not a metaphor. The breath was a measurement and a count, and the count was 4, and the 4 had inside it the shape of a right no one had cast in living memory. By the end of the 3rd day, Harry could breathe the count without thinking. By the end of the 1st week, he could breathe it while reciting aloud. By the end of the 2nd, he could breathe it under a small physical strain that the loremaster increased by precise degrees each morning. "Why the breath, sir?" Harry asked, on a morning of the 2nd week. "Because the spell will not survive the absence of it. A duelist's curse depends on a wand and a word. Ours depends on the body. The body's metronome is the breath. If the breath fails, the spell fails. The spell failing in our discipline is not, as in dueling, a missed shot. The spell failing in our discipline is yourself on the floor, looking up at a ceiling you are not going to see again. There is a reason the suppression took 40 years. We are not easy to kill. There is also a reason no one practices the line lightly. We are not easy to keep alive." Harry breathed the count. He breathed the count again. "How many spells will I learn, sir?" 12. "There are more in the books. There are not more that we will teach you. 12 is sufficient. A practitioner of the line who knows 12 spells fluently is more dangerous than a duelist who knows 600. 600 is fewer than it sounds. 12 is more." "And when do I learn the first one?" The loremaster smiled very slightly. It was not a smile that came often. "In 2 years, young master, not before." By the end of his 9th summer, Harry knew the breath, the 4 postures, the 7 hand positions, and the long count from which all 12 spells were drawn. He did not know any of the spells. He had asked twice in the 1st week when he would. He had not asked again. The loremaster was a man whose first answer was, in his observation, the only answer he intended to give. He returned to Privet Drive in late August with a height his aunt did not remark on and a stillness she did, the day after his return, slap him for. The slap did not move him. The slap had to do its own work and gave up after the 2nd attempt and was not repeated. Aunt Petunia, in the kitchen, drank her tea standing. In his cupboard, he laid his palms flat against the floor and breathed the long count, and the floor, on the 3rd inhalation, very faintly warmed. The 10th summer began with 2 months of repetition before any new material was introduced. Repetition, the loremaster said, was the discipline. The line did not advance by acquiring new technique. The line advanced by acquiring depth in old technique. A young practitioner who learned 3 spells a summer would, in 10 years, possess 30 unreliable instruments. A young practitioner who learned 1 spell every 2 years would, in 10 years, possess 5 instruments he could trust under any conditions, including his own grief. Trust, said the loremaster, is the operative word. We are not in the business of casting. We are in the business of casting reliably. It was in the 2nd month of the 10th summer that he learned the first spell. The loremaster called it the pin. It had no Latin name. It had no name in the language of duelists. It had a name in the tongue the loremaster spoke when he was not speaking English, and the name in that tongue was a single syllable that did not sit in Harry's mouth the first 6 times he tried to say it. The pin, said the loremaster, fixes the subject in space. It does not stun. It does not bind. It does not freeze. It removes from the subject the ability to choose any next motion. The subject continues to breathe. The subject continues to think. The subject does not move. The pin is the foundation. Every other spell in the line begins by pinning. What does it cost, sir? Harry asked, because he had begun to learn the right questions. To you, the pin costs the breath of 1 count. To the subject, the pin costs the duration of being pinned. There is in our discipline no spell which costs nothing. You will not in your life cast a spell of this line without something leaving you to make it happen. Be aware of this. Do not be afraid of it. Awareness without fear is the 2nd principle. The 1st principle is breath. He cast it on Harry the first time to show him. Harry, who had been told to stand at a particular point on the slate, was standing at the particular point, and then he was standing at the particular point and could not, by any decision available to him, move. He could see. He could hear. He could swallow. His weight was still on his feet. The breath kept going. He simply could not, when he asked his hand to lift, get the hand to receive the request. The request did not feel refused. The request felt as if it had been gently, definitively set aside, like a letter laid on the wrong tray. The loremaster lifted the pin after 20 seconds. Harry's hand rose on its own initiative to scratch his cheek. That, said the loremaster, is the pin. You will learn it now. You will practice it on a wooden post for 1 summer. You will practice it on a chicken for the 2nd summer because the chicken's metabolism approximates the human and because we have, regrettably, no wooden posts that breathe. You will not in our presence practice it on a human being until your 14th year. Is that understood? Yes, sir. When you cast it in earnest, young master, you will know. The pin is a quiet spell. It does not announce. There is no flash, no light, no sound. To an observer, the subject will appear briefly to forget what he was doing. This is its first virtue. Its second virtue is that it is, in modern dueling, not recognized. The wand fashions of the last 3 centuries have taught your kind to look for light, sound, motion. The pin offers none. It is, by the standards of your present age, invisible. Harry, who had not been allowed during the demonstration to be afraid, felt, for the first time and last time that summer, the named feeling which was awe. He set it aside. He had been taught to set things aside. He took the wand the loremaster offered him, which was not his wand and would not be his wand and was only a teaching piece carved from Goblin U, and he stood and he breathed the count of 1 and he reached with the trained part of himself for the syllable he had not yet been able to say in his own mouth. He said it. The wooden post at the center of the room did not move. Of course it did not move. The post had never moved. But Harry, looking at it, knew that for the duration of 1 breath the post had not been free to move, and had returned to its freedom only because he had let it. Good, the loremaster said. There was no warmth in the word and no coldness either. There was the precise measurement of a teacher acknowledging that the work had been done. Again. He cast it 8,000 times that summer. He knew the number because the lore master kept the count. In the third summer, the summer of his 11th year, the summer before Hogwarts, he learned the second spell. The lore master called it the halter. It was the pin, but applied to a part rather than a whole. With the halter you could fix a man's hand, or a man's throat, or the small muscle behind a man's eye that let him aim a wand. The halter was a refinement, the lore master said, that the order had developed in its last century because the older pin had attracted in duels a reputation for theater. The halter did not attract reputation. The halter ended a duel before the duel had been recognized as in progress. You will not, young master, the lore master said, use the halter for theater. The halter is for the spell hand. The spell hand only. There are 6 other applications described in the book. We will not teach you the other 6 until you are 17. If you, in the intervening years, attempt them on your own initiative, you will discover that the line does not approve. The line will withhold from you for as long as it sees fit the spells you have already learned. I have seen this happen. It is not pleasant. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good, said the lore master. Now, Diagon Alley, you require a wand. He took Harry to Ollivander's on a Tuesday morning because Tuesday mornings in Diagon Alley were the quietest, and because the lore master had a goblin's preference for not being seen doing things in public. Ollivander stood behind his counter and looked at the lore master, and the lore master looked at Ollivander, and the two of them did not speak for half a minute. Ollivander was an old man who had outlasted 3 ministries, and Ollivander had on his face the look of a man who is about to be obliged to sell a wand he would prefer not to have sold. Master Loremaster, Ollivander said at last. Wandsmith, the Loremaster said, you bring a customer. I bring an heir. Ollivander's pale eyes settled on Harry, and Harry, who had been taught not to flinch, did not. There was, in Ollivander's gaze, the working of an older man through a long memory, and then a small adjustment at the corner of his mouth, and then a quiet exhalation. Yes, Ollivander said. I see. James was your father. James was a stag. James was good steel, well-tempered, very straight. Lily was holly and willow at once. She was a study. You are the third I have measured today and the first I have ever in my career measured for the line. Wandsmith, the loremaster said, we are short of time. You are always short of time. Ollivander turned to his shelves. He did not, as he sometimes did, climb. He did not, as he sometimes did, hesitate. He went to a high cabinet at the rear of the shop, which Harry had not at first noticed because it had been arranged not to be noticed. And he opened it with a key from a chain around his neck, and he took out 1 box, 11 inches holly with a core that I will not, by long agreement with the nation, name aloud. Ollivander said, opening the box, made 52 years ago, never sold, has been waiting. Harry took it. The wand fit his hand the way water fits a glass. He did not need to wave it. The wand, when it took his measure, did so quietly. There was no shower of red sparks, no flare, no theater. The shop's air instead settled the way a room settles when a window that has been rattling in the wind is closed at last. Ollivander watched, satisfied and not pleased. You will not, young man, Ollivander said, tell anyone what core. You will not tell your friends. You will not, if you are wise, tell your teachers. The wand is yours. It is not the wand the boy who lived was expected by certain parties to receive today. They will in time wonder. Let them wonder. Yes, sir, Harry said. The loremaster paid in unmarked gold. They left. They were halfway up the cobblestones, the loremaster's hand lightly at Harry's shoulder, when a tall man in black came down the lane the other way and did not stop walking and did not slow. He passed within 4 feet of them. He did not look at Harry, he looked at the loremaster. The look lasted a heartbeat. The loremaster, very slightly, inclined his head. The tall man's mouth did not move. He continued down the cobbles toward the apothecary and did not look back. "That young master," the lore master said when they had turned the corner, "was a Mr. Snape. You will meet him at school in 2 months. He has in his time been near certain books. He has not today decided what to do about us. We will not give him cause to decide quickly." "Yes, sir. One further matter. At your school you will meet a man named Albus Dumbledore. He is, by the standards of your kind, formidable. By the standards of ours, he is a man who learned late that he had not been told everything. He will, in his own time, attempt to take an interest in you. Permit the interest. Do not invite it. Do not, in his presence, do anything that would require him to ask a question to which the answer is the line. There is a long game here. We are not in a hurry. The headmaster in his own century has not been in a hurry either. We are not yet adversaries. We may not need to become adversaries. Do not, on your initiative, become them." "Yes, sir." "Good. Your letter will arrive in 3 weeks. You will pretend to be surprised. Do this well. Your aunt will be more difficult than your uncle. Your cousin will not notice. Goodbye until summer. We are pleased with you, young master. The line is pleased with you. Do not, at school, give either of us cause to be otherwise." The letter, when it arrived, came by owl in the middle of breakfast. Uncle Vernon shouted. Aunt Petunia went very white. Dudley dropped a sausage. Harry, who had been schooled in surprise, performed surprise to a degree that satisfied even his own internal critic. By the time Hagrid came knocking, 3 days later, the household had run through its repertoire of denials and accepted that the boy was going. Hagrid did not see, in the boy who shook his enormous hand on the doorstep, anything Hagrid had not been told to expect. Hagrid saw a small, thin boy in 2 large glasses, with a kind of attention that he attributed, in the moment, to nerves. He took Harry to Diagon Alley a second time, by a route Harry pretended not to recognize. He took him to Madame Malkin's, where Harry stood on a stool and was measured by a woman who chattered to him about house colors. He took him to the menagerie, where Harry chose, on instinct, a snowy owl. He took him at last to Ollivander's, where Ollivander, who had been warned, performed for Hagrid a perfectly serviceable show with 3 perfectly inappropriate wands, and at the end of which he produced, from a different shelf, a holly wand of 11 inches that he sold, for the second time, with a small private smile. Curious. Ollivander told Hagrid for the benefit of Hagrid, very curious. The brother of this wand, you see, gave him that scar. Hagrid wept a little. Harry, who had been holding the same wand for 2 months in another room, watched himself receive it for the first time and admired the performance. He thought, that night, in the inn above the leaky cauldron, with the iron token in his fist under his pillow, "This is going to require lying to a very large number of people in a particular way for a very long time." He thought, "I will be good at it." On the 1st of September, the platform at King's Cross smelled of coal and treacle, and the small steaming life of 1,000 parents who had not, this morning, slept. Harry made his way down the carriages with his trunk, and he found an empty compartment, and he sat with his back to the corridor and his face to the window and watched London withdraw at the pace of a slow lung. A red-haired boy with a smudge on his nose put his head in. "Sorry, anywhere else full. Sit, if you like." The boy sat. The boy had freckles and the kind of shoulders that had spent the summer chasing his brothers across a field. The boy introduced himself as Ron Weasley, and after the first awkwardness, the chocolate frog, the famous scar, the disbelief, Ron settled into the seat opposite with the easy openness of someone who had grown up in a house full of brothers and had learned, very early, that liking a person was simpler than not liking them. "It's just," Ron said with a half-laugh, "Mum talked about you all summer. Sorry, I'm not going to do it anymore. Promise." "It's all right," Harry said. "You don't talk much." "All right then," Ron said. He grinned. He had a grin that did not require Harry to return it, and which therefore Harry, after a moment, returned anyway. The compartment door slid open a second time. A girl with very thick brown hair and an air of having read all of the books on the train already stood in the doorway with the slightly apologetic determination of someone who had decided, before she had left her own carriage, that determination would be required. "Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one." "No," Ron said. "Are you doing magic? Let's see then." "I'm not actually," Ron said, slightly defensive. She looked at Harry. Her eyes were brown and very direct. They did the small adjustment of someone who had been told what to look for. "You're Harry Potter." "Yes. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read about you. 3 of the books, 2 of the introductions. Sorry, I'll go and look for the toad. I should go and look for the toad. I will, however, come back." She did. She did so twice during the journey, the second time with the toad found and returned, and she sat down opposite Harry without asking and ate half a pumpkin pasty and looked at Harry over it. "What house do you think you'll be in?" she said. "I don't know." "That isn't true," she said. He looked at her. She did not look away. She had a face, he saw, which had been told too often that it was wrong, and had decided, by perhaps the age of 7, that it would be right anyway and the world could either keep up or step aside. He found with a small interior surprise that he set immediately aside that he liked her. "I don't know yet," he said. "Where they will put me, I know where I would not mind." "Good," she said, satisfied with the precision of the answer. "That is more honest. I have been told I am insufferable. I am working on it. Are you reading anything? I will lend you something." She did. Across from them, Ron grinned at the window. Ron had been raised in a house in which one did not need to read in order to be entertained, and Ron had concluded, in the space of an hour, that the boy across from him was going to be all right, and that the girl, while alarming, was probably necessary. At the castle the boats rocked under the first years and the lake reflected a sky Harry had not seen in his life. The doors of the great hall opened. The Sorting Hat sat on its stool and did its singing. The names were read. When Harry's name was called, the hall did the small subduction of breath he had expected. He had practiced in his cupboard his face for it. He walked to the stool. He sat. The hat came down over his eyes. "Oh," the hat said. The hat in the inside of his head did not speak the way it had sung. The hat in his head was older and considerably less amused. Oh dear. Yes, hello. I have not sorted one of yours in some time. The last was, let me see, 1541. He was a small one. He was placed in Slytherin. He died very badly in 1543. I would prefer not to repeat the experience. Now where will I put you? There is courage in you. There is. There is also a particular kind of patience that did not used to be courage in this country and now is. There is loyalty. There is, yes, a considerable amount of cunning which I will not insult by pretending I do not see. The line in you would prefer Slytherin. I would prefer not to oblige the line. The line has, in my long experience, an unfortunate tendency, when placed in Slytherin, to find playmates. Let me see what your own preference is. Yes, you have a preference. You have a friend already on your bench. I am not surprised. I have been doing this a long time. There was a pause. Gryffindor, the hat said aloud to the hall. Harry came to the table at which Ron was already sitting. Ron clapped him on the back. Hermione, 2 tables over, clapped politely and did not look at him because she had decided not to, and Harry, who had been observing her, noted the decision and filed it. At the staff table, Dumbledore watched the small dark-haired boy walk down the row of red and gold, and noted, as he had noted on the platform and in the boats, that the boy did not look around. The boy did not crane to see the ceiling. The boy did not stare at the candles. The boy walked. The walk was, very faintly, that of someone who had been somewhere before and had been told not to make a show of having been. "Minerva," Dumbledore said when the meal was halfway through, "remind me to take tea with the boy at the end of the week." "I will, Headmaster." "And Severus, you will, I trust, observe him in your first lesson with him on Friday." "As I observe all students, Headmaster," said Snape. "Severus, you will observe him as you observe no other student." Snape did not answer. He turned the silver fork in his fingers a quarter turn. He did not, for the rest of the meal, take his eyes off the Gryffindor table for longer than the demands of decorum required. On Friday morning in the dungeons, when the air smelt of bitumen and damp stone and the small green essences of the cupboards, Snape did his first walk of the lecture and stopped, with the deliberate near-stillness of a snake that has decided not to strike yet, at the desk of one Harry Potter. He asked his 3 questions. He received from Harry 3 slow, steady "I don't knows," delivered in the polite, low voice of a boy whose aunt has taught him not to volunteer. Snape considered him. "Famous," he said, very softly. "Sit up, Mr. Potter." Harry sat up. "Look at me." Harry looked at him. Snape held him there in the silence of the dungeon for perhaps 3 seconds longer than was customary. The class did not breathe. Snape's eyes did the small, private movement of an inventory being taken. Then, almost imperceptibly, Snape took a half-step back. Harry, who had been schooled by a goblin loremaster in the breath of 1 count, observed that Mr. Snape's own breath had, for the duration of the inventory, very slightly altered and had now returned to itself. 5 points from Gryffindor for inattention, Mr. Potter, Snape said. "Yes, sir." "And a further 5 for the look on your face." "Yes, sir." "Very good," Snape said. He moved on. The lesson continued. That evening at the staff table, Snape did not eat his pudding. He sat with his hands folded in his lap and looked across the hall at the Gryffindor first years. He did not, when Dumbledore at last leaned over and addressed him in a low voice, give the answer the headmaster had been hoping for. "Severus." "Headmaster, what did you see?" "I saw," said Snape, after a long, careful pause, "a small, thin boy in 2 large glasses, with the breath of a man who has been taught to count it. I do not know who taught him. I do not believe I am at present permitted to ask. I will, with your permission, observe him further before saying more." Dumbledore's hand on the stem of his goblet did not tighten. It did not, however, lift to drink. "You may," he said, after a moment, "observe him." Saturday morning the headmaster invited him to tea. It was the small invitation that, in the careful, gentle paper of an aunt's hand, the aunt would have called a kindness. It was, in fact, a survey. Harry climbed the spiral stair to the office, gave the password Professor McGonagall had whispered to him in the corridor, and stepped into a room that smelled of lemon and old wood. The portraits on the walls did not, at his entrance, all look at him. One of them, a thin man in black with a face that bore no painted patience, quite deliberately looked away. "Come in, Harry, sit. Lemon drop." "Yes, please, sir." Dumbledore set the silver bowl between them. The drop in Harry's mouth was the small bright sweetness of a sugar a child would, in any other house, have asked for. Harry took it the way he had been taught by the loremaster to take any food offered by an older man whose intentions were not yet established, with thanks, with attention to the small flavors under the sugar and with the breath at 4. "Your first week," Dumbledore said. "Tolerable." "Yes, sir, thank you." "Lessons agreeable." "Yes, sir." "Professor Snape." "He is strict, sir." "He is. You will find in time that the strictness is, in his own register, the way he attends. He is a man whose attention is, by long practice, the inverse of his manner. I would, on the basis of 1 week, encourage you not to mistake the manner for the verdict." "Yes, sir." Dumbledore poured the tea himself. He moved in his old wrinkled hands with the careful, unhurried economy of a man who had been pouring tea in the same office for a long time. He did not, during the pouring, speak. Harry, who had been told by the loremaster that the headmaster would, in this conversation, ask 3 questions and would phrase them as 4, set himself to listen for the question among the questions. "Tell me, Harry, are you happy in your dormitory?" "Yes, sir. Ron Weasley is kind." "He is. The Weasleys are, on the whole, a kind family, and Miss Granger, I am told, has adopted you." "She has, sir, in a way. She lends me books." That is the highest form in her case of adoption. The book she lends, what kinds, may I ask? Question 1. Harry set down the cup with the small, private steadiness of a boy who had practiced in his cupboard the placement of a cup on a saucer at the long count of 2. Histories, sir. Hogwarts, a history. Bagshot, a book on charms theory, a book about magical races. Magical races. Yes, sir, centaurs, goblins. He did not flinch on the last word. He did not, in the speaking of it, change his breath. He named it the way one names a tree on a path. The path had many trees. Goblins, Dumbledore said very mildly. Yes, an interesting people. You have, I think, met one or two. Question 2. The teller at the bank, sir, when I came in with Hagrid. He took me to my vault. Just Hagrid. And Hagrid, sir. There was a small pause. The portrait who had looked away did not look back. The other portraits were doing the small, careful study of portraits whose subjects have decided to listen, but not to be seen listening. Harry, I should be plain with you. There is a question on my desk this morning to which I would, in the ordinary way, have asked your guardian. Your guardian, I am afraid, is not in a position to be asked. I will, therefore, ask you. There has been, in correspondence with my office, some mention that you may be receiving instruction in your holidays from a party I do not yet have a clear name for. Is that the case? Question 3. Harry, who had rehearsed the answer to question 3 for 11 months, gave the rehearsed answer. I have, sir, been receiving some instruction in the matter of my family's affairs from the bank. They said it was customary for an orphan of an established family. I did not, sir, know if I should mention it. They told me it was confidential. Confidential, Dumbledore said. Yes, sir. By whose word? By the loremaster's word, sir. Dumbledore set his cup down. He did not, on the saucer, make any noise. He looked for one moment at the boy across his desk, and the look was, in its small private register, the look of an old strategist who had asked a question, and had received an answer he had partially expected and had not fully expected. The expected part was that the boy would acknowledge a tutelage. The unexpected part was that the boy would name the loremaster. The boy had been told, in fact, to name him. The loremaster, on the morning before the train, had explained the precise reasoning. The naming, he had said, is the small concession we will make to the headmaster on the matter. The naming gives him a fact. The fact will satisfy him for the first conversation. He will, on the basis of the fact, conclude that he is not being lied to. He will not, on the basis of the fact, learn what he wishes to learn. The honesty in the small matter buys us, by the headmaster's own habits, the silence in the larger. Thank you, Harry, Dumbledore said after a moment. That is, in fact, the answer I had hoped for. I will not press further today. I would only ask, and you may, of course, decline to answer, that if anything in the course of your instruction were to cause you discomfort or fear or a sense that you were being asked to do a thing you did not wish to do, you would feel able to come to me. Yes, sir. Good. Have another drop. Harry had another drop. The conversation, by long courtesy, moved to safer subjects. The headmaster asked after Quidditch, after his glasses, after the Dursleys in a phrasing of careful neutral concern. Harry answered the questions with the small, steady politeness of a boy who had been raised to answer adult questions politely. The fourth question, the question among the questions, did not, after all, come. The headmaster, it appeared, had decided not to ask it that morning. Harry, at the door, inclined his head. Thank you for the tea, sir. Any time, Harry. He went down the spiral stair. At the bottom he stood for a moment in the corridor and breathed the long count 3 times, by way of cleanly closing the working of the conversation. He went up to the tower. In the Gryffindor tower, 3 floors up and a long corridor along, a small dark-haired boy lay in a 4-poster bed for the first time in his 2nd week, and held an iron token in his closed fist, and breathed the long count and slept. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The spell that lay sleeping the first month at Hogwarts had the shape of any first month at a boarding school. Corridors to map, stairs to misjudge, the names of teachers to fix to the faces of teachers. Harry, who had spent 3 years learning the long count and the 4 postures, found that the rhythm of classes did not break his discipline. He woke at the hour the discipline asked him to wake at, which was the hour before bells. He washed in cold water because cold water was a teacher. He sat in charms and transfiguration and herbology, and did the work assigned, and he was, by his own private standard, neither remarkable nor invisible. He was, in front of his teachers, a boy of moderate competence. Behind their backs, he was a boy whose hand positions on the practice wand under his bed were unwavering. The lore master had said, "Do not give them a question to which the answer is the line." Harry had taken this instruction seriously. He took it most seriously in defense against the dark arts. The man who taught defense that year was named Quirrell. Quirrell had a stutter that he wore like a coat he had borrowed from someone larger. The coat did not quite hang correctly. The classroom smelled of garlic and of something else underneath the garlic that Harry, in the second week, identified as a thing he had been taught in Gringotts to recognize. The lore master had told him, "There is in our discipline a way of knowing when a soul does not sit correctly in its body. You will, in time, recognize it. The recognition will not require thought." Harry recognized it in the second week. He did not say so. He sat in Quirrell's class with his hands folded over his textbook and his breath at one count, and his face turned a degree to the left so that Quirrell's turban was always at the edge of his vision rather than at its center, and he learned, very carefully, very deliberately, to do nothing visible. He did not, however, do nothing internal. Each evening in the dormitory, after Ron had snored into the pillow and the curtains had been drawn, Harry took the iron token from under his pillow and held it on his sternum and breathed the count, and asked himself the question the lore master had taught him to ask. What is in this castle that ought not to be in this castle? The answer by the end of October had taken a shape, a kind of greasy thread, leading from Quirrell's classroom up through the corridor to the 3rd floor wing, which a passing prefect had been heard to mention was forbidden this year by order of the headmaster. Harry did not follow the thread. The lore master had also taught him, the line is patient. The line acts when it must act and not before. He held the thread in his mind, the way one holds a length of yarn for a cat that is not yet hungry. He kept his head down. He answered when called on. He let Hermione lend him books, and he read them, and he handed them back with the small specific comments she required, and after the 3rd book she had, almost without meaning to, adopted him. Ron had been adopted from the train. By the middle of October, the 3 of them sat together in the library and in the great hall and walked together to lessons, and Harry found, in a small interior corner he had not known was empty, that he had friends. The named feeling of the month, when at last he allowed himself to name it, was gratitude. He named it once in private and set it aside. Halloween fell on a Friday, and the great hall had been hung with the floating pumpkins the upper years made every year by mass charm. The feast was loud. Harry sat opposite Hermione, who had spent the day not speaking to either of them because Ron, in a charms lesson, had said an unkind sentence about her in a voice that had carried. Harry had not, at the moment of the sentence, said anything. He had, after the lesson, told Ron that the sentence was the wrong sentence to have said. Ron, who had been raised by a mother who hit him for that kind of sentence, had agreed instantly and miserably, and had been working up to an apology since. He had not yet delivered it. Hermione, by long practice, was making him do the work. She was therefore not in the hall when Quirrell ran in unsteady, his turban very slightly askew, and announced, in a voice that did not entirely fit his usual stutter, that there was a troll in the dungeons. Harry, in the chaos that followed, looked at the staff table. Snape was looking at Quirrell. Snape's face had done its small inventory and arrived at a conclusion. The conclusion did not move from his face to anyone else's because Snape was Snape, but Snape was already standing. Dumbledore was sending the prefects to take their houses to the dormitories. Harry caught Ron's sleeve. "Hermione, she doesn't know. She doesn't know," Harry said again, and that was enough. Ron's face went the color of the misery that had been queuing in him all day, and the two of them broke from the Gryffindor line in the corridor outside the hall and ran. She was in the girls' bathroom on the second floor in a stall, with her face wet and her chin set. The troll was on the same floor, 2 corridors over, and trolls have a particular smell that travels. The smell reached them at the bathroom door. So did the troll. It was 12 feet of gray-green muscle in a stained loincloth, and its club had been recently broken and retied with sinew at the head, and its small, dim eyes had the look of an animal that had been told to be here and had not been told why. It came around the corner with its head lowered and the smell of it ahead of it like a fist. "Hermione!" Ron shouted. She came out of the stall and the troll saw her, and the troll lifted the club. What happened next, Hermione would later, in the small, honest privacy of her own diary, be unable to set down accurately, because her eyes had been on the troll and on Ron and not on Harry. She remembered afterwards only that Harry had been standing very still by the basins, with his right hand half raised and his lips moving in account, and that the troll had come into the room and lifted its club and prepared to bring it down, and then the troll, very quietly, had not brought it down. The troll stood with its club at the apex of its arc. Its arm did not lower. Its arm did not, in fact, do anything. Its small, dim eyes registered, fractionally and slowly, the change in its own situation. Its mouth opened, perhaps to grunt. The grunt did not come out because the grunt also required a motion, and the motion was not available. Harry in the corner by the basins lowered his right hand, the pin held. His breath had moved by 1 count and by no more. "Hermione," he said very quietly, "out slowly." She moved past the troll. Ron, with his wand out and his face white, did not move because he had not yet noticed that the troll was not moving. Then he noticed. His mouth, for once, said nothing. "Now, Ron," Harry said. Ron moved. The 3 of them edged into the corridor. The troll in the bathroom did not turn. The troll had been pinned in the apex of a downward swing and was now experiencing, to whatever extent a troll could experience anything, the small disagreeable knowledge that the world had stopped consulting it about what it would like to do next. Harry stood in the corridor and breathed. "What did you do?" Hermione whispered. "Held him," Harry said. "How?" "Practiced." She looked at him. There was in her look something he had been preparing for, the way one prepares for a tax form. He met it. He did not look away. He did not lie. He simply said nothing further and waited. It was at that point that the adults arrived. McGonagall in the lead, hair coming undone, Snape a half-step behind her, Quirrell trailing, with the look of a man who is performing fear and the performance is convincing him. McGonagall took in the corridor. She took in the 3 students. She took in the bathroom door behind them, and through the door the upright club and the troll under it, and Snape's eyes flicked, very deliberately, to the boy in the center of the corridor, and from the boy to the troll, and from the troll back to the boy. "Explain," McGonagall said. Ron began miserably to explain. He told the version that flattered no one. Hermione, after a moment, interrupted with the version that flattered Ron. Hermione had decided, in a heartbeat in the bathroom, which of 3 people she was going to protect. She decided to protect both boys. She left out of her account the precise position of Harry's right hand at the moment the troll had stopped moving. She left out of her account the count of his breath. She placed Harry at the door of the bathroom, with a wand raised in the general manner of a startled first year. She told the lie with a steadiness that even McGonagall, who had been reading children for 40 years, did not catch. McGonagall awarded points and took points, and gave a brief lecture on the unwisdom of approaching trolls. She instructed the three of them back to their dormitory. She turned with Snape and Quirrell to deal with the troll. Snape, as the three students passed him, did not look at Hermione and did not look at Ron. He looked for a single second at Harry. Harry met the look. Snape's mouth did not change. He nodded by perhaps a quarter of an inch and turned away. In the dormitory, Hermione cornered Harry by the window. "You held him." "I held him." "What spell?" "One you have not read." "What?" "Hermione," Harry said, "I will tell you. I will not tell you tonight. I will tell you when I have decided to. Until that time I will need you not to ask. I am asking, please." She looked at him for a long time. She had her arms folded. She had her chin set. She had, he could see it, the precise interior debate of a girl who had been raised by parents who had told her repeatedly that the world was knowable if you put in the work. She was being asked by a friend to leave a thing unknown for a while. She was deciding in that moment whether friendship outweighed knowing. "Until when?" she said. "Until I have permission to tell you, from someone older than I am. Who is not in this castle. Goblin, Hermione, that is enough. Yes, I will not ask again," she said. "Until you decide, I am, however, going to read. You cannot stop me from reading. I would not dream of it." She nodded once and went to bed. He heard her, 10 minutes later, get back up and take a book from her trunk and crack the spine of it under her blanket and begin to read by wandlight. He did not that night sleep until she did. He owed her, he thought, that much. Ron, in the bed opposite, was already asleep. Ron had spent the evening surviving a troll, and that had been Ron's quota of waking for one day. The terror was, in him, real. It had not yet been examined. He would, in the morning, look at Harry differently. He would, by the afternoon, sit beside him again at breakfast and ask, in a low voice, if Harry wanted his last sausage. Ron had been raised by a household that did not require the working out of a thing to be done before the thing was accepted. Ron, in his own loyal, terrified, colloquial way, had accepted. The autumn closed. The first snows came. The greasy thread from Quirrell's classroom in Harry's interior map thickened by week. In the second week of February, Hermione, who had been reading every old book Madam Pince would let her sign out and several she would not, took Harry aside in an empty classroom and laid in front of him a single sheet of parchment on which she had copied, in her precise round hand, a paragraph from a book whose title she would not name. He read the paragraph. The paragraph was a description in the cautious, vague prose of a 16th-century catalogue of an order of practitioners outlawed by the Wisengamot in 1498. He folded the parchment. "Hermione, I know," she said. "I haven't told anyone. I know. Are you in danger from it? Number, is anyone in danger from you? No one who does not deserve to be." There was, in her face, the small, involuntary flinch of a girl who had not expected the answer to be that one, and the slower, harder set of a mouth deciding what to do with the answer it had received. She nodded once and put the parchment in the inside pocket of her robe. "I will burn it tonight," she said. "You will not. You will lock it in your trunk, and you will, in 2 years, when the danger has resolved itself, take it out and read it again, and at that point I will tell you what was true and what was not, if I am by then alive. You will be. Hermione, you will be." The greasy thread thickened through March. The stone, Harry had pieced together the stone, sat behind a series of inadequate locks in the third-floor corridor. And the man with the thing under his turban was, by infinitesimal degrees, getting closer to the door. In June, on the night of the Quidditch final, when most of the castle was out at the pitch and the corridors were quiet and the chess set on the dungeon level had been left set up by a careless prefect, the thread snapped. Harry felt it snap in the great hall, halfway through dinner. He did not stand at once. He finished, calmly, his bread. He drank calmly his water. He waited for the lower years to be dismissed. He told Ron and Hermione in a voice that did not encourage discussion that he was going up to the dormitory, that they should go to the pitch, that they should not, under any circumstance, follow him. Ron, who had developed an instinct for Harry's particular voice, went. Hermione looked at Harry once for a full breath, and went too. She trusted, by June, the instinct that her friend was on his way to do a thing that he was, by some training she did not yet entirely understand, equipped to do alone. Harry went up the staircase, and along the corridor and down 2 flights, and along a further corridor, and the iron token at his sternum was warm, and the long count of his breath was at 4, and his right hand, in the sleeve of his robe, held the holly wand the way the loremaster had taught him to hold it, not in the grip of a duelist, but in the grip of a craftsman who has worked the same handle for 50 years. The door to the 3rd-floor wing was open. The dog inside was, Harry saw at a glance, asleep, a harp playing itself at the rear of the chamber. He stepped over a hairy paw and dropped through the trapdoor. The chambers below had been, he supposed, the protections of the various staff who had been asked to contribute. They were not the protections of anyone whose hand was on the long count. He came through Devil's Snare by the simple expedient of breathing and not moving, which the plant, in the small dim intelligence available to it, accepted as the kind of stillness it did not need to argue with. He let the plant down past him. He came through the flying keys by the expedient of catching one with his hand, because the hand had been trained to catch things that did not wish to be caught. He came through the chess board by the expedient of declining to play and walking, very quietly, around the perimeter of the floor, while the white pieces watched him without intervening, because the white pieces had been built by a magic that knew an order older than chess when it walked past. He came through the troll chamber. There was a troll there, slumped against the wall, recently knocked out, by stepping carefully over its leg. He came through the potions puzzle by drinking the 3rd bottle from the left, because the loremaster had taught him to count from the left. He stepped through the black flame. The chamber on the other side was round, low-ceilinged, lit by no torch he could find. In its center stood the mirror of Arist. In front of the mirror stood a man in a turban with his back to Harry. The man's shoulders were thin. The man's hands were trembling at his sides. The man's breath was loud and irregular, in the manner of a person who has been running a long time on the strength of someone else's lungs. The man turned. "Potter," said Quirrell, in a voice that was not his own. Quirrell's mouth had opened. The voice came from inside the room and not from Quirrell's throat. It was a thin voice, sibilant, imperious, hungry, a voice that had been waiting at the back of an unwilling skull for 10 years and was tired of waiting. "Come here, boy," it said. Harry did not come. He stood in the doorway. He raised his right hand. He breathed. He did not, in the 11 seconds that followed, think. The line did not require thinking at the moments when the line was required. The line required the body in which it had been laid down, to do what it had been laid down to do. What follows is the thing he would, in later years, not speak about, because the speaking of it required a register his ordinary mouth did not contain. He breathed the long count. The count was 4. He set his feet at the angle of the second posture, which was the posture of a craftsman addressing a piece of work that had been brought to him for the doing of a particular job. He raised his hand to the 7th position, the position of the carpenter laying down a chisel edge on a board he intends to mark. He spoke, without breath in front of the word and without breath behind it, the first syllable of a rite whose name had not been pronounced in any English mouth since the year 1543, and whose pronouncing required of him the entire arrangement of bones in his face, of muscles in his diaphragm, of tendons in the small joints of his wrist. The chamber, when he spoke the syllable, did not light. The chamber, when he spoke the syllable, did the opposite of lighting. The black flame at the door behind him fell to its knees. In the way a flame falls when the air it had been breathing has been politely declined by something older. The mirror in the center clouded over. The torches in the wall sconces, which had not been lit when he came in, guttered out a second time on principle. The room understood that a right was being prosecuted in it, and the room, being a room of stone and old, knew the right. The room arranged itself to be present. The thing in Quirrell's body lifted Quirrell's arms. It did not get to lift them very far. Harry spoke the second syllable. The second syllable was the naming. The naming did not strike Quirrell. The naming reached past Quirrell into the structure of the thing that had been wearing Quirrell for 10 months, and named the thing, not by any title that thing had given itself, not Lord, not Voldemort, not Marvolo's grandson, but by the older true name that the thing had been given, in a register so far down the substrate of being that the thing itself had not heard the name in 80 years. The thing, hearing the name, shrieked. The shrieking was internal. The shrieking was inside the room. The shrieking was inside the bones of the boy who had spoken the name. Harry kept his breath at 4. The breath held the right. The breath held the room. He spoke the third syllable. The third syllable was the account. The account did not list the dead. The account did not need to. The account told the thing that the dead had been counted, and that the count was on a ledger older than the thing, and that the ledger had been forwarded for action. The account told the thing, with a kind of clinical calm, that its presence in the body of one Quirinus Quirrell was an irregularity, and that the irregularity had reached the attention of a clerk who did not, by any procedure available to the modern ministry, exist. He spoke the fourth syllable. The fourth syllable was the severance. The severance separated the soul fragment of the thing from the body it had been wearing. The severance did not tear. The severance did the work the way a butcher's apprentice, on his good days, separates a joint without bone fragment, along the line of an existing seam. The soul fragment came out of Quirrell's body in the small protesting shape of a smoke that did not have the shape of any animal but had, at its leading edge, the shape of a face. The face wore the expression of a man who has, all his life, expected to be the one who decided when the conversation ended, and is now discovering otherwise. He spoke the fifth syllable, which was the pin. The pin held the soul fragment in the air, 2 feet above the floor, 3 feet in front of the mirror. The pin did not hurt the soul fragment. The pin did not need to. The pin held it. Harry, breathing the long count of 4, looked at it. He did not in the moment do anything further. The line had been laid down. The thing in front of him was, in any meaningful sense, the property of an older court, not his. He was 11 years old. He was, by the loremaster's instruction, not yet permitted to execute. He was only permitted to hold. He held. The room was very quiet. Behind him in the doorway, the black flame slowly, reluctantly, rose again to its full height. Through the flame came Severus Snape, who had been 3 flights up when the rite began and had felt it in the metal buttons of his coat. Snape stopped in the doorway. He took in the chamber. He took in the body of Quirrell on the floor. Quirrell was breathing faintly, the breath of a man who has been emptied of a tenant and is, by degrees, remembering that he can breathe on his own again. He took in the smoke thing pinned in the air. He took in the boy with the holly wand at the 7th position and the breath at 4. His face did something it had never, in the recollection of any of his colleagues, done. It went, for a fraction of a second, very pale. "Potter," Snape said. He did not move. He spoke with a slow exactness, the way one speaks to a person at the edge of a drop. "Mr. Potter, where did you learn this?" Harry, who would not have answered the question for any other man, gave Snape, out of the small respect of one careful practitioner for another, half an answer. "I have been taught, sir." "By whom?" "By the people whose right it is." Snape looked at the smoke pinned in the air. He looked back at Harry. He had been in his father's library when he was 11. He had read the unmarked book before his father had burned it. He had recognized, in the first syllable Harry had spoken, the alphabet of a rite he had thought he had imagined. "You will release the pin," Snape said very carefully, "in your own time. The headmaster is on the stairs. He will arrive in approximately 1 minute. You will not, when he arrives, speak of the syllables you have used. You will speak of a defense against a possessed teacher. You will permit me to handle the body. You will not look at the smoke. The smoke, after you release it, will leave by a route I have already arranged. Do you follow me?" "Yes, sir." "Good, Mr. Potter. One further matter. I am, from this evening, no longer in any doubt as to who has been teaching you. I will not interfere. I will not, however, pretend not to know. There will come a point in your school career at which I will have to act in your defense in front of the headmaster and the ministry. Until then, you will permit me to seem to despise you. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." "Excellent." Snape stepped into the room. He spoke a low private word, and the smoke, released by Harry's breath at 5, exited the room by a seam in the stone that had not been there before and would not, after Snape had spoken his word in reverse, be there afterwards. Quirrell, on the floor, gave a long thin moan and stopped. He was dead. He had been dead for some seconds. His death had been the kind of death that the body of a host arrives at, after a parasite of that order has been pulled, by the joint of its own preference, out of him. Dumbledore arrived at the doorway 40 seconds later. He took in the chamber and the body and Snape and Harry. He took in the absence of any visible spell residue, which was the line's signature and which he had spent 4 years half hoping he would not, in his own school, have to see. "Harry," Dumbledore said, with a great mildness. "Headmaster, you are unhurt." "Yes, sir. Severus has, I see, attended." "Yes, sir. Severus." "Headmaster," Snape said. The boy defended himself with what means I do not at this moment propose to enumerate. "Professor Quirrell is dead. I will arrange the body. I will arrange the report. I would suggest, Headmaster, that we permit the boy to return to his dormitory." Dumbledore looked at the body. He looked at Harry. He looked, for one careful moment, at the mirror in the center of the room, which had clouded over and would not, by anyone's effort, clear again for the rest of the term. The mirror had decided. The mirror had been present at a rite and was being polite about it. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Yes. Harry, you will go up to your dormitory. We will speak in the morning. Severus will see you to the corridor." Snape took Harry to the corridor. He did not speak. At the door he paused. "Potter, sir, sleep tonight if you can. The first time the body has cast that rite, the body does not generally sleep. I have in my own cabinet a draft. I will not give it to you. You should learn now what your body does after. The loremaster will, I assume, expect a report. Tell him I behaved correctly." "I will, sir." "And Mr. Potter." "Sir." 5 points to Gryffindor for the breath. Harry walked to his dormitory. He lay down. He did not sleep. He breathed the long count, and the long count held him, and at some hour after 3 he saw, through the dormitory window, the moon decline into the lake. He held the iron token to his sternum. The token was, he found, no warmer than it had been. In the headmaster's office an hour later Albus Dumbledore did not sit. He stood at his window. The fire in the grate had not been lit. The night was warm. There was a knock at the door. Dumbledore did not answer. The knock was a courtesy. The door opened anyway. Goblin King Ragnarok came into the room. He had brought no escort. He had brought no token. He had brought with him only the precise smallness of his own body and the precise iron circlet at his brow. He inclined his head by the amount a king inclines to a colleague of long standing whose colleagueship he has been preparing for some years to revise. "Headmaster, your Majesty, you have this evening seen a rite cast in your school by a boy of 11. "I have." "You will, I assume, have several questions." "I will in time have several questions. I have at present one." "Ask it." Dumbledore turned from the window. The lake behind him was settling. He looked very tired. He looked in the moment very nearly his age. "Will the boy be safe?" he said. Ragnarok considered him. There was in the consideration the slow weighing of an old king who was deciding, in real time, whether the wizard before him was a man he could permit himself to respect. In our hands, Ragnar said at last, he will be made. In yours he will be observed. The line, headmaster, does not require your protection. The line requires that you do not, by any well-intentioned interference, undo the work that is being done. We have come tonight to tell you plainly that the work is being done. We have come tonight to tell you plainly that you may attend to your prophecy and to your war, and that the boy will, in his own time, attend to his own work. We have come, finally, tonight to tell you that the Goblin Nation considers the boy under our protection, and that an injury done to him by any party not yet named will be answered by the nation. I am sure you understand the form of the answer. I will not insult you by drawing it. Dumbledore did not answer for some time. He sat at last in the chair behind his desk. He folded his hands. He is a child, he said. He has not been a child, Ragnar said, gently, since the night his mother held a door against your prophecy at the age of 1. The line did not let him be a child after. The line lay down in him and slept until he was 8 and lifted his cousin off a climbing frame, and at the lifting it woke. We did not wake it. You did not wake it. It woke itself. We are, however, capable of teaching it manners. You, with respect, are not. There is no malice in this observation. There is only the long catalogue of who in this country knows how to teach what. You are aware, Dumbledore said, of the Dark Lord. We are. He is at present in a form. We have observed the form. He will in time seek another. He will, and the boy, will in his own time and in our discipline attend. The line was made for this, headmaster. The line was outlawed by your ministry for political reasons. The reasons are not at present relevant. What is relevant is that the line was made in its origin to attend to precisely the kind of thing that has, in your war, surfaced. The thing in your war is older than your ministry. The line is older than the thing. The arithmetic, headmaster, is straightforward. Dumbledore closed his eyes for a long moment. He opened them. What do you require of me? He said. Nothing, said Ragnar, beyond what you have already given. We require that the boy be permitted to attend Hogwarts. We require that he be permitted his friends. We require that you not, on your own initiative, place him as a piece on the board of your war until the piece has been allowed to grow to the size at which it can stand on its square. We require, headmaster, your patience. We have had 400 years of practice with ours. We are confident you can manage 3 more. Dumbledore did not speak. He inclined his head. It was a small inclination, but it was the right one. Ragnar turned to go. At the door he paused. One further courtesy, headmaster. The teacher he killed tonight was already dead. The body had been a vessel for some months. The boy did not, by any reckoning we recognize, take a life. He performed a removal. I think you have been a long time among your kind. I think you will understand the difference. I think also that some among your colleagues will not. You will perhaps prefer them not to know what kind of removal it was. We are on the matter of public report content with your discretion. Thank you, Dumbledore said with great quiet honesty. You are welcome, said Ragnar. He went. In the dormitory above, Harry Potter at last slept. He slept with one hand on his sternum and one hand under the pillow on the iron token. He did not dream. The line did not, on the night after, give him dreams. The line let him rest. It was, in its old way, courteous. Chapter 3 end. Chapter 4. The veteran at 14, by the autumn of his 4th year, Harry Potter had grown 2 inches, learned a 3rd spell of the line. The loremaster called it the quench, which was the pin applied to fire and to flame-shaped magics, and discovered that the work of moving invisibly through Hogwarts had become, by long practice, almost dull. The Triwizard Tournament had been announced at the start of term feast. Beauxbatons arrived in a flying carriage drawn by horses the size of cottages. Durmstrang arrived in a ship that came up through the lake bed by a route the lake had not been previously consulted about. The hall stood and cheered. Harry stood and clapped at the correct intervals and ate his pudding and watched, from a corner of his eye, the way Madame Maxime walked past the staff table, and the way Professor Karkaroff did not, when seated, ever turn his back to a door. He noted these things and filed them. The loremaster had taught him, in any room you intend to do work in, identify on entry the persons who are nervous about the doors. They are the persons most likely to make decisions that involve the doors. The goblet of fire was placed in the great hall on the second night and stood there for a week. Harry walked past it twice a day without looking at it. He had not put his name in. He did not intend to put his name in. He had by the end of the week the discipline not to think about the goblet at all when he passed it, in case the goblet was the kind of artifact that listened to attention. Old objects, the loremaster had taught him, sometimes were. On the night the champions were chosen, the goblet threw out 3 names, Crumb, Delacour, Diggory, and then, after a long pause that the hall did not quite know how to fill, a 4th. The 4th piece of parchment, when Dumbledore caught it from the air, bore the name Harry Potter. Harry was eating bread. He set the bread down. He did not look up. He continued to chew slowly the bite he already had. The hall around him did the slow inward gasp of 700 people who had been preparing to leave their seats and now realized they had to remain in them. Hermione, beside him, set her hand on his wrist. Ron, on his other side, made the small involuntary noise of a boy who had been raised by Molly Weasley and was now considering in real time what Molly Weasley would say about this. "Mr. Potter," Dumbledore said from the staff table. His voice did not rise. The hall, however, picked it up. "Yes, headmaster. Would you please come to the antechamber?" Harry stood. He let go of the bread. He walked the length of the hall at the pace of a boy on his way to a conversation he had not asked for. He did not look at the Ravenclaw table. He did not look at the Slytherin table. He looked briefly at Snape. Snape's face did the small private compression that in him was the equivalent of another man swearing aloud. In the antechamber, the 3 older champions stood in postures of confusion. Maxime arrived, then Karkaroff. Bagman bounded in with the kind of enthusiasm that did not understand the room it was in. McGonagall arrived a half-step behind Dumbledore and stood by the door with her hands clasped in front of her in the way she always clasped them when she was very angry and was choosing, by long practice, not to let the anger have the room. "Headmaster," Karkaroff said immediately, "this is unacceptable." "It is irregular," said Dumbledore mildly. "Harry, did you put your name in the goblet?" "No, sir." "Did you ask an older student to put it in for you?" "No, sir." "Are you, in any sense, attempting to participate in this tournament?" "No, sir." "Yet you have been chosen, and the goblet, having been chosen, has produced a binding magical contract on the chosen. We will, I am afraid, have to honor it." Harry inclined his head by the amount the loremaster had taught him to incline it in the presence of an old man whose decisions he was, by treaty, required to be polite to. "Yes, headmaster." The room did not, at first, know what to do with the inclination. Bagman, in the corner, was rubbing his hands together. He had the look of a man who had been promised a story and was about to receive a better one. Maxime stared down at Harry the way one stares at an animal that has, by the wrong door, walked into a kitchen. Karkaroff continued to protest in a voice that was now too loud for the antechamber. Cedric Diggory, who had been silent, looked across the room at Harry with the calm, puzzled politeness of a senior boy who had not yet decided whether to be angry or sympathetic, and who would, in the end, settle on something between the two. "It will be all right, Cedric," Harry said. "Will it?" "It will be all right for you. I will, in this tournament, not place you in danger. You have my word on that. You will, however, want to keep clear of me in the first task." "The first task is going to look bad." Diggory blinked. He took in, for the first time properly, the boy in front of him. He took in the breath, which was at 4. He took in the eyes, which were quiet. He took in the small, steady stillness of a body that had been taught to be exactly where it was standing. "All right," Diggory said slowly. I will keep clear, Karkaroff was still shouting. Maxime had folded her enormous arms. Dumbledore had not in the past 4 minutes looked away from Harry once. 3 weeks later, in a private chamber beneath Gringotts, the lore master considered his student across the slate. "You did not put your name in," he said. "No, sir." "You did not, by any of your habits, attract its attention." "No, sir." "Then someone else has done. The list of persons capable of bypassing an artifact of the goblet's age is short. I will, with the nation's apparatus, narrow it. In the interim, you will not refuse the tournament. The tournament was the work of a hand we have not yet identified, and the refusing of it is what the hand would prefer. You will attend. You will perform. You will, by the standards available to a fourth year, win. You will not, in winning, draw on the deeper instruments of the line. You will use only what we have by this autumn taught you, and you will use it sparingly. The headmaster has, by treaty, agreed to your attending. The headmaster will not, by treaty, interfere. The headmaster's school will be the more curious for it. You will, by the end of the tournament, have been observed. The observation cannot be helped. Make the observation as careful as it can be." "Yes, sir." "And young master, sir, on the matter of the first task, we have been informed by a friendly source, friendly because his interest is in not seeing the boy he loaned us last August killed, that the first task is dragons. You will not in the task kill the dragon. You will not in the task harm the dragon. You will not in the task frighten the dragon. You will speak to it. The binding rite of the throat will be taught to you this evening in compressed form by myself. It is the 4th spell of the line. You were not, until tonight, scheduled to learn it for 2 years. We are advancing the curriculum. You will accept the advancement, and you will not in any class at Hogwarts demonstrate that you have it. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." The binding rite of the throat was, in the description the lore-master gave, less a spell than a permission. The line had been formed in a century when dragons were judicial witnesses. The line had had in those years courteous arrangements with the great worms. The arrangements had been written down. The writing down had survived. The binding rite reactivated in the small the old courtesy. It did not force the dragon to do anything. It asked the dragon in the dragon's own register to recognize the practitioner as one to whom recognition had once been owed. A dragon recognizing the right would not attack. A dragon recognizing the right would, in good weather, occasionally bow. "Will it bow?" Harry asked. "That depends," said the lore-master, "on the dragon." The first task came on a cold morning in late November. The arena had been built in the field beyond the Quidditch pitch. The stands were full. Harry, in the tent, watched the other champions go through the curtain one by one. Crumb with a wand and a curse to the eye. Delacour with a soothing charm that had partial success and a small fire on her skirt. Diggory with a transfigured rock that bought him precisely as much time as he needed. Each champion went in and came out and was applauded. When Harry's name was called, he stood. He walked through the curtain. He did not run. He walked the way the lore-master had taught him to walk into a room one was about to do work in, which was the walk of a man who had paid the cab and was not in a hurry. The dragon, a Hungarian horntail, by the color of its eye and the angle of its tail spines, turned at the center of the arena and saw him. He did not raise his wand. He set his feet. He breathed. He spoke, in the language the lore-master had given him, in the language the horntail had been listening for since 1421, the first syllable of the binding rite of the throat. The arena, at the speaking of the syllable, did the thing it would later have great difficulty admitting it had done. The dragon stopped. The dragon's wings did not lower. The dragon's tail did not lower. The dragon's small black eye with its slit pupil found him at the far edge of the field, and the dragon did the small involuntary motion of an animal that has, in the middle of its working day, been addressed in a tongue it had not been addressed in 70 years. The pupil widened. The pupil narrowed. The pupil widened again. Harry spoke the second syllable. The second syllable was, in literal translation and introduction, "This practitioner is of the line." The practitioner is owed, by old courtesy, hearing. The practitioner does not today require the egg behind you. The practitioner requires that you set the egg in front of you and step back 2 strides. The practitioner will retrieve it. The practitioner will not in the retrieval touch you. The practitioner will not after the retrieval address you again until the rite has been undone. The dragon stood. The dragon in its small ancient intelligence understood. There was in the stands a hush of the kind that comes when 700 people, with 700 different prejudices, are simultaneously persuaded that they are looking at something they do not have a word for. The hush stretched. It stretched the length of 1 breath of the long count, and then a second, and then a third. The dragon lowered its head. It was not a bow, it was a courtesy. It was the small motion a duelist makes in the old fashion, when he is acknowledging that his opponent has a wand in his hand and that the wand has been counted. The horntail moved her head fractionally down, fractionally to the left, and rolled with great deliberation, with great care for the eggs in her clutch, to one side, exposing the false golden egg that the keepers had placed. Harry walked across the sand. He picked up the egg. He inclined his head to the dragon, the small inclination of practitioner to witness, and walked back. He stepped through the curtain. The arena behind him, after a beat, exploded. In the tent the medics took the egg from him. Harry sat on a stool. Bagman in the doorway was speaking with great rapidity to someone in the corridor. Outside, the stands had recovered from their hush and were arguing in 3 directions at once. The judge's bench had not yet, by McGonagall's later account, decided what score to award. The issue under debate was whether a contestant who had not, in any conventional sense, contested could be said to have won. They gave him a 40. The 40 was, by tradition, a perfect score. Karkaroff voted 3 out of obstinacy. The crowd, who had decided privately what they had seen, made its own scoring. Harry sat on the stool with the iron token warm against his sternum and the long count at 4 and did not, for a long minute, look up. Diggory, behind him, set a hand briefly on his shoulder. The hand said, "I do not know what you did, and I will not ask." Harry very slightly inclined his head back. The inclination said, "Thank you." In the stands Hermione had not, throughout the task, lifted her hands from her mouth. That night in an empty Charms classroom on the 4th floor, she did the thing she had been preparing for 2 years to do. "Sit down, Harry," she said. He sat. She placed on the desk between them a sheaf of parchment in her own round hand. The top page bore a heading. Under the heading, neatly indexed by year and by source, were the references she had collected since the night of the troll 3 years and 1 month earlier. He did not look at the parchment. He looked at her face. "Hermione, you promised." "I did. I am about to keep the promise. You will, however, need to listen first." "May I? You may," he told her. He did not in the telling name the spells. He did not in the telling name the loremaster. He named the order. He named the year of its suppression. He named the line. He named, with the precision of a boy who had been taught to use small words about large things, his own position in the order. Heir, untrained and outreigned, in possession of 3 spells of 12, under tutelage which would continue for several more years. He said, "I do not enjoy this. I do not in any sense look forward to using it. I am, however, going to use it when I am required to. I would, if you are willing, prefer that you remain a friend through it." She listened. When he was done, she sat very still. Her hands were folded on the parchment. She had been throughout the color of a girl who has been told in plain sentences, a thing she had partly suspected for months and had been hoping to be wrong about. The wrongness had not been granted to her. She was now processing the rightness. "All right," she said at last. "All right. Yes, I have been preparing for all right for 3 months. I have in my own head rehearsed a number of versions of this conversation. They mostly ended in all right. I am, however, going to ask one further thing of you." Ask, tell me when you are about to cast, not the syllables, not the rite, just tell me. Say my hand is going to be on this. Then I can stand behind you. Then I can be present at it. I do not want to be one more person in a stand who watches a thing she does not understand. I want to be, even if I do not understand it, the friend who is at your back. Do you follow? He followed. I follow. Good, Ron. Ron knows what he needs to know. Ron has decided. Ron will not, even under duress, ask further. Ron understood by the dragon more than he is letting on. Ron's brothers have raised him on the principle that some questions are not for asking, and Ron has decided I am one of those questions. She nodded. All right, she said. Then we proceed. The second task was scheduled for the 24th of February, and the egg, when it howled, did not howl. The egg, when Harry opened it underwater in the prefect's bath after the message, a senior Hufflepuff had passed to Cedric had reached him through Diggory's good manners, sang. The song was in Mermish. The loremaster, when consulted by token, sent a return message that read, Yes, we know the choir. We have on retainer a tutor who is not, in the legal sense, alive anymore, but who is willing. The tutor came in a dream 3 nights in succession and taught Harry, in his sleep, what the song meant. In the days before the task, Harry went down to the lake at dawn and sat on the bank and breathed the long count and let the lake recognize him. The lake had been there a long time. The lake had had, in its time, visitors of the line. The lake had not forgotten. On the morning of the task, the merfolk in the Black Lake had, by means Harry did not directly perceive, been informed by their elders that the practitioner of the old order had come to retrieve a hostage, and that the retrieval would be conducted by old courtesy under truce. Harry did not eat breakfast. He went into the water in his swim trunks and the school robe, with the small pouch of gillyweed Mr. Crouch had thoughtfully arranged for him provided by another channel. He let the gillyweed take effect. He breathed the water. He swam. He did not need to find the village. The village had arranged itself, on his approach, into a corridor that admitted him through its center, with its inhabitants on either side at a respectful 3-yard distance. The Marelder at the head of the corridor, a creature of perhaps 80 years, with a face that had seen wars before the ministry had been founded, raised, as Harry approached, both webbed hands palm out in the old gesture of recognition. Practitioner, elder, the hostage of your party is bound to the rock to your right. You may release her at your own pace. You are owed, by old courtesy, the assistance of any of my people. You are owed, by older courtesy, refusal of nothing under this water that you might ask. We are honored by your presence. We were not, in any of the 7 generations of our memory, prepared for it. We have prepared in the night since the elders were told what hospitality is available to a creature breathing through a green leaf. I am grateful, elder. I am owed nothing for the grateful. I am owed, however, one small task. Name it. The elder turned and pointed. At the far edge of the village, a long, thin shape, a Grindylow, ancient by the look of it, attended by a small pod of younger Grindylows, was being held in a circle of mer warriors. The elder said, in a voice that the water carried more cleanly than air would have, It has killed 3 of our young in the past month. It cannot be reasoned with. It is older than our discipline, and the discipline does not in our hands hold. We were preparing to do the work ourselves by the old hard means. We would prefer, if the practitioner is willing, that the work be done by the practitioner by the proper rite, with the proper ledger. Harry looked at the Grindylow. The Grindylow looked back at him with the small green-yellow malice of a creature that did not, in its long life, know any other expression. He saw, with the trained part of himself, the seams along which it could be undone. He saw, also, the children in the rock clefts behind the mer warriors. He saw the 4 bodies that the Grindylow had in the past month made. He looked at Hermione, who was the hostage on the rock. He had not, on entering the water, looked at her. He looked at her now. She was asleep in the spell sleep of the task. She would not see this. He looked back at the elder. I will do the work, elder. I will, however, require that it be conducted by your discipline as a request and not as a sport. I am 13. I am not by my tutelage yet permitted to execute. I am permitted in cases of formal request from a recognized authority to act on the authority's behalf. Will you, elder, formally request it? I formally request it, said the elder. Then it is done. He raised his hand. He breathed the count. He spoke very quietly the syllables, the pin, then the naming, then the account, then the severance, then the pin again. The Gringotts did not move. The Gringotts had been pinned at the first syllable. The naming named what it was. The account stated in the language of the old ledger the 4 dead. The severance separated, with the precision of a watchmaker, the small dark soul thing inside the Gringotts' anatomy from the body that had been carrying it. The body collapsed to the sand. The pin held the soul thing for the duration of 1 breath. Harry, looking at the elder, breathed a 5th count which released the pin. The soul thing released, did the thing such things did when released without a body to return to. It dispersed. There was no sound under the water. There was, instead, a stillness that the merfolk recognized in their bodies the way a chapel recognizes the silence after the priest has said the last word. The elder bowed. The bow was a long, slow bow of a being who had been waiting many years to bow to anyone. It is done, practitioner. It is done, elder. Harry swam back to the rock. He pressed his hand against the rope at Hermione's wrist. The rope, by the pin, did not pin, it simply loosened. He took her in his arm and he swam back through the corridor, and he came up through the surface of the lake into the cold February air with Hermione on his shoulder. The crowd in the stands cheered. The crowd had not seen the Gringotts. The crowd had only seen the boy and the girl coming up out of the water. In the stands, in the 3rd row of the staff section, the man who at that point in the year called himself Aleister Moody had been watching with his glass eye. The glass eye, which did not have the courtesy of an eyelid, had not blinked once in the 70 seconds the rite had taken. The man who was, in fact, Barty Crouch Jr., a Death Eater of considerable training in the body of an Auror of considerable training, had recognized the rite. He had not been raised in a library that had contained the unmarked book. He had been told about it once, by his master, in a private hour in his master's chambers in 1979, when his master had been describing, in the long, imperious, sibilant register that Crouch had learned to listen to without flinching, the order of practitioners that his master most regretted having to share a world with. Crouch knew the rite. Crouch knew, also, that the rite had been cast in a black lake by a boy of 14, who was at present being applauded by a crowd that did not understand what they had just been allowed to look at the edge of. Crouch's hands on the rail of the stand did not move. He had the long discipline of a man who had been raised by a father who would have struck him for moving. He spent the remainder of the morning in a state of internal arrangement that, on the outside, looked precisely like the steady glare of an old Auror. That night he wrote a letter. He wrote it in cipher. He sent it by a route his master had arranged. He told his master in the calmest sentences he was capable of that the boy was of the old line, and that the 3rd task as currently arranged was going to fail, and that the master would need to consider whether the resurrection ritual plan for the night of the 3rd task could survive the contact with blood of that order. The master's reply came in 2 days. The reply was short. It said, "The ritual will proceed. We will see what survives." Crouch read the reply. He folded it. He sat for some hours in the dark of Moody's quarters at the top of the defense corridor and did not move. He did not, in those hours, decide anything. He had been told by his master what would happen. He would attend. In the great hall that week, Snape, at the staff table, watched Harry eat his breakfast with the cold professional attention of a man who has now, twice in 3 years, seen a rite cast in his school that ought not, by any treaty available to the modern ministry, to be cast anywhere. He did not speak to Harry. He did not, in his classes, address him beyond the strict minimum the curriculum required. He did, however, walk past him in the corridor on the second Thursday in March and say, in a voice no one but Harry could hear, "Mr. Potter, the third task will be a portkey. You will not, on the portkey, panic. You will, on arriving wherever it goes, breathe the long count. You will not, in front of the Dark Lord, cast the full rite. You will cast the pin. You will cast the halter. You will not cast the severance. You will let his ritual fail of its own weight. The blood is the failure. The blood is sufficient. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Harry said. "And Mr. Potter, sir, if you do not return from the portkey, the loremaster will be informed by me, by a route the headmaster does not know about. He will, I assume, attend to it." "Yes, sir." Snape did not look at him. He walked on. Hermione, in the library that evening, set down her quill and said, "He is helping you. He is." "Why?" "Because he was raised in a house with the book. Because he is, by his own private register, a careful man. Because he hates the Dark Lord more than he hates my father, which is not an arithmetic," he announces aloud. "That is more than you have told me of him in 3 years." "It is what I know." She nodded. She wrote a small private note on the corner of her parchment, which she later that night burned in the fire of the common room. The note had read, "Trust Snape if necessary." The decision had not been an easy one for her, and the burning of the note had been the formality by which she committed to it. Ron, at the other end of the table, did not ask. Ron had spent the year not asking. Ron had developed over 4 years the small, steady patience of a brother who had been taught by his elder brothers that some things in a family one did not interrogate. He passed Harry the pumpkin juice. He spoke about Quidditch. He did, at one point in the evening, in a voice he kept quiet, say, "I'm with you, mate. You know that, right?" Harry looked at him. "I know it, Ron." "Good." The third task was set for the 24th of June. The maze in the Quidditch pitch had been growing all spring. Harry, who had taught himself the long count under far worse circumstances than a hedge maze, did not rehearse for it. He rehearsed instead with the iron token under his fingers in the dormitory each night, the syllables of the spells he was permitted in extremis to cast. He did not rehearse the syllables of the severance, because the loremaster, by sending a small parchment via the token, had ordered him not to. The severance, the loremaster's note read, "You will not cast in the cemetery, nor in the field, nor on the master himself. The blood is the failure. Snape was right. Do as he has told you. We will collect the rest in our own time." Harry kept the note. He read it twice a night. He breathed. He did not, in the days before the third task, name a feeling. He had been taught not to name them in the week before a working. The named emotion was a tax he did not pay that month on his focus. He let what he felt remain anonymous, and the anonymity held him steady, the way ballast holds a ship steady when the wind is doing what wind does. In the staff table, Dumbledore watched him. Dumbledore had, over the 4 years, learned the precise shape of the boy's mealtime quiet, and had developed, in his own old way, a small private respect for it. He did not, in those last weeks, try to intervene. He had been told by Ragnarok, in plain language, not to. He had been told, by his own slow rereading of the old records, that the line had been outlawed by men whose names he did not, on long reflection, wish to be aligned with. He sat at his table, and he ate his meals, and he watched the small, dark-haired boy who at 4 years old had had a scar set into him by a curse, and at 8 had been claimed by a king, and who would, in the field of his 14th year, be required by some hand still to be identified to step through a portkey into a place from which no portkey had been arranged to bring him back. Dumbledore had not, that month, slept well. The named feeling in him was helplessness. He set it aside in the manner he had been taught to set aside such feelings 60 years before, in a different country with worse company. He waited. In the week before the third task, Harry was permitted, by McGonagall's intervention and the headmaster's signature, one afternoon's leave from the castle. He took the leave on a Wednesday. He traveled by Goblin courier, a method the loremaster had arranged that would not, in any of the ministry's logs, appear, to a small chamber under Gringotts that Harry had not, in his 3 years of summer tutelage, been into before. The chamber was a vault. The vault had no number. The vault had been, by the loremaster's quiet account, in the keeping of the Goblin Nation for the line for some hundreds of years. Inside the vault was a small wooden chest. Inside the chest were 6 objects. The objects were, by their look, of no value to anyone who did not know what they were. A wooden cup, a brass weight, a length of red cord, a small whetstone, a folded square of unmarked gray cloth, and a thin iron pin of the kind a tailor would use to mark a hem. These, the loremaster said, are the working tools of the line. Each in its time has been used. Each in its time will be used by you. They will not in your school years leave this vault. They are yours. You may, when in this chamber, hold them. You will not in this chamber today work with them. The pin you may, however, take into your hand. Harry took the pin. It was warm. In the small private way the iron token at his sternum was warm. It was older than the token. It was older than the chamber. The pin had, by the long arrangement of practitioners passing it from teacher to student, been held by hands that had been working in the days before the ministry had existed. The pin recognized him. He held it for one breath. He set it back in the chest. It knew you, the loremaster said. That is, by our books, a confirmation. We did not, before today, have a final confirmation. We have one now. You are the line knows you. The pin is the last word on it. Yes, sir. The task in 5 days. You will in the maze conduct yourself as we have discussed. You will on the portkey conduct yourself as we have discussed. You will in the cemetery do precisely what I have told you to do and nothing further. You have in this last year learned the patience that is the practitioner's foundation. You will apply it. The cemetery is not, by my reading of the substrate, the day the rite is to be performed. The cemetery is the day the rite is to be served as notice. There is a difference. The serving of notice is, in our discipline, the more difficult of the two. It requires the practitioner to look at the subject and to walk away. You will, on the night, walk away. You will do this with the body of one Cedric Diggory, which is the kindness of your generation toward a boy whose parents will, on the morning of the 25th, deserve to receive him. Yes, sir. And on the morning of the 25th, Harry, sir, you will, by appearing, have changed the country. The country will not, on the morning of the 25th, know it has been changed. It will, by the autumn, know. The change is not yours to manage. The change is the substrate's. Your work is not to manage the change. Your work is to remain in the year of the change a practitioner of the line. You will hold the count. You will not, by any provocation available to your enemies, lose it. The line endures provocation. Provocation is, in our books, the secondary discipline. Do you follow? Yes, sir. Good, go up, eat, sleep, return to your school. He went up, he ate, he slept, he returned. The 5 days passed in the small, careful rhythms of an examination week. The 7th years had their newt papers, the 5th years had their owls, the 4th years had the 3rd task. Harry attended classes. He took his notes. He answered Hermione's small, careful prompts in the library and made for her on the evening of the 23rd the small private promise she had asked for. Tell me when. He told her. He told her that night in a low voice in the common room that the 24th would be the night. She inclined her head. She did not press. On the 24th of June at dusk, the champion stepped to the mouth of the maze. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Resurrection that failed the maze on the night of the 3rd task was darker than the hedges had any business making it. The walls rose 20 feet on either side and curled inward at the top in the manner of an old library closing for the night. The judges had laid in obstacles that an ordinary fourth year might have struggled with: a boggart in a corridor, a sphinx by the third turning, a blast-ended scroot the size of a pony at the long northern bend. But Harry walked through them with the small, steady stillness of a man stepping through a quiet street at 3 in the morning. He did not engage the boggart. He simply did not look at it long enough to be addressed. He answered the Sphinx's riddle on the first attempt because he had read the kind of book the Sphinx had been programmed from. The scroot he disarmed with the halter, applied to the joint of the front leg from which the flame issued. The creature, having been gently relieved of the option of bringing the leg forward, retreated. He found Cedric Diggory standing in a long, straight corridor with his wand out and his face the color of paper. Cedric had been gored by a corridor or two back. Along the line of his ribs, he was holding the wound closed with his free hand. He looked up at Harry's footstep with the wary alertness of a boy who had been jumped at twice already. "Cedric, Harry, the cup is around that corner. I see it. You should take it. We should take it together, Cedric." Diggory looked at him. Diggory had spent the last 6 months working out what kind of person Harry Potter was. The working out had not been easy. Diggory had decided by the spring that whatever Harry was, Harry would not in his school career double-cross a fellow champion. He had decided this not on evidence but on instinct, and the instinct had been correct. "Together, then," Diggory said. The cup sat on a plinth at the center of the corridor. The corridor was empty. The cup had been polished. The cup had 3 handles, one of which Diggory was already reaching for. Harry stepped to the cup and put his hand on the second handle, and the moment his fingers closed on the silver, he understood that the cup was not a cup. The portkey took them. There is, in the Loremaster's catalog, a precise description of what a portkey feels like to a practitioner whose discipline includes breath. The description had run, in the catalog, a momentary cessation of the long count's right to govern the body. The body remembers the count on landing. Do not in the air attempt to breathe. Wait. On the count's return, resume. Harry waited. He landed on grass. He landed in a place where the air smelled of mown summer and of cold turned earth and of something underneath that smelled like a kennel that had been recently scrubbed, but in which, the night before, a small dead thing had been kept. A graveyard. He recognized the smell of the underneath. He had been to the small cemetery behind the parish church in Little Winging exactly twice in his life. Both at Aunt Petunia's insistence, the underneath had smelled the same. He set his breath at 4. He reached for his wand. He felt for at his sternum the iron token. Beside him, Cedric got to his feet, wiping mud from his palms. "Harry, where?" "Cedric, get behind me." Cedric did not move quickly enough. A short man in a dark cloak came up between 2 graves with a bundle in his arms and a wand in his hand. The wand was not a duelist's wand. The wand had been waiting. The short man, a man whom Harry had, in a long-ago photograph in his father's box, identified as one Peter Pettigrew, raised the wand and spoke 2 words. A green light cut the air. Cedric fell. He fell, in the technical phrase, like a man for whom the breath has ceased to be available, which is what the curse did and what the curse was for. Harry did not move. He had been taught by the Loremaster that the working person does not move when a second person is killed in their presence. The working person observes. The observing person identifies the next priority. Cedric, by the moment his shoulder struck the grass, was beyond reach of any spell available to anyone in any of the books Harry had ever been permitted to read. The Loremaster had been very clear on this point. The dead are not the practitioner's business. The dead are the dead. The practitioner is required to attend instead to the persons in the room who have not yet died, including, where applicable, the practitioner himself. He inventoried. Pettigrew, 8 yards off, with the bundle in his arm. The bundle was small and dark and breathing, in a wet, shallow way that suggested lungs not yet entirely composed. Behind Pettigrew, a great cauldron stood over a fire, with steam rising in 3 plumes. Beyond the cauldron, a tall headstone bore the name Tom Riddle in chiseled letters. The arrangement of the headstone, the cauldron, the fire, and the bundle was, by the second look, a ritual arrangement of a kind Harry had been taught to recognize. The lore master, in his sleep tutorials of the previous month, had described several. He recognized this one. He had been told what to do. Pettigrew, with hands that trembled in a way the cloak did not hide, dropped the bundle into the cauldron. The cauldron drank. There was a small sucking sound. The steam thickened. The flame under it grew taller. Pettigrew, weeping, set a black thorn stick at the edge of a grave near the largest headstone and began to recite. He recited the recipe. "Bone of the father," he said, "unknowingly given, you will renew your son." A dust rose, very thin, from the grave. The dust collected itself in the air, fell, and went into the cauldron. The cauldron grew brighter. "Flesh of the servant," Pettigrew said, "willingly sacrificed." He had at his belt a long, thin silver knife. He raised the knife. His left hand was on a low headstone. With a movement that betrayed every nerve in him, he brought the knife down on his own wrist. The hand parted. The hand fell into the cauldron. Pettigrew's scream was the scream of a man who had been working up to this scream since November and had, now that the scream had finally arrived, more of it inside him than he had room for. The cauldron, drinking the hand, brightened a second time. Pettigrew, dripping, took the silver knife in his good hand. He turned towards Harry. "Blood of the enemy," he said, in a voice that was now half his own and half something else. "Forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe." He came at Harry. Harry did not retreat. He had been taught by the lore master and confirmed by Snape what to do about the third ingredient. He had been taught, in the precise sentence he had memorized, that the blood of one of the line did not, by the substrate of being, take. He had been taught that he was to let Pettigrew, in this one instance and one only, have what he had come for. He held out his arm. He breathed the long count. He spoke inside his mouth, the syllable of the halter, applied not to Pettigrew, but to the small interior part of Harry's own circulation that the blood would, in the cauldron, attempt to be. The halter, on his own blood, did not stop the blood. The halter on his own blood did the older trick the lore master had described in 2 whispered sentences at the very end of the last summer, which was to mark the blood as of the line, to set on the blood the small, invisible sigil that meant, in the language of the substrate, "This is not material for your ritual. This is material from an older ledger. The ledger refuses your transaction." Pettigrew cut him. Pettigrew caught the blood on a small silver dipper. Pettigrew, weeping and trembling, carried the dipper to the cauldron. Pettigrew tipped the blood into the cauldron and said the last words of the recipe. The cauldron stuttered. The fire under the cauldron rose to a fierce blue point, and then dropped by half. The steam, which had been thickening, thinned. The cauldron made a noise of a kind Harry had not heard before and would not, in his long life, hear again. The noise of a sustained instrument receiving a string it could not, by its own design, accommodate. Pettigrew, who had been on his knees, lifted his face to the cauldron and stopped breathing. The thing that rose out of the cauldron, for something did rise, was not the resurrection that had been worked for. The thing that rose had the shape of a man. The thing that rose had the limbs of a man. The thing that rose was naked and pale and snake-faced, and yet the thing that rose was wrong in a way Harry, even untaught, could have seen. The body was leaking. The body was leaking in the way an old wineskin leaks. Down the seams, at the joints, at the long line of the spine, a thin smoke escaped. The body, looking down at itself, paused. The body's 2 long-fingered hands, lifting in front of its long bare face, were translucent at the fingertips, and as it watched, the translucence advanced down the bones 1 knuckle's width per breath. The body looked up. The body's red eyes met Harry's. "Boy," it said. The voice was the voice Harry had heard in the chamber under Hogwarts at the end of his first year. The voice was the voice that had said, "Come here, boy." The voice was the voice that had ridden Quirrell to his death and had been ejected by the Severance and had, in the intervening years, been collecting itself by the means available to its kind. The voice was, however, thinner than it had been. The voice came from a throat that did not entirely hold air. The body looked down at itself a second time. The body looked at the cauldron. The body looked at Pettigrew, who was still on his knees and still not breathing. The body understood what had happened. The understanding moved across its long, bare face in a sequence Harry had been taught by the loremaster to recognize. Surprise, then disbelief, then a swift, cold rage, then the colder, slower thing the loremaster called the dawning, which was the recognition by a being that, while it had thought itself the cleverest party in a transaction, it had been transacted upon by an older clerk. "What," it said very quietly, "have you done?" "I have," Harry said. "Let you have what you came for." "I have, in addition, paid the price of letting you have it. The price, in my discipline, is on a ledger you have not previously consulted. I have settled the ledger. The settling by the rules under which your ritual was conducted has resulted in the body you are now standing in. I am sorry it is not the body you were expecting." The thing, Voldemort, closed its hand. The hand was an act of will against a body that did not, by the looks of it, intend to keep its fingers. The hand closed. The hand held. "You," Voldemort said. There was in him the slow recognition of the old register. The loremaster, in his catalogue, called the recognition the moment of address. It was the moment at which an opponent stopped speaking to the practitioner as if to a boy and began speaking to the practitioner as if to a colleague. The recognition was a courtesy. It did not, however, indicate truce. Harry said, "You are of the order. I am of the line. There is no longer an order. There is no longer an order. There is, however, a line. I am the last of it." "Then there will," Voldemort said, "be no last." He cast. He cast quickly. He cast in the long-trained reflex of a man whose right arm had been, for 50 years, the most reliable instrument he possessed. He cast the killing curse. The killing curse was a green bolt of compressed will, and it crossed 8 yards in less than a heartbeat, and it struck Harry where Harry had been standing, and it dissolved. It did not pass him. It did not, technically, miss. It struck him and dissolved. The loremaster had described, in a single sentence in the 3rd summer, what happens to the killing curse when it is offered to one of the line in a place properly held. The sentence had been, "It does not take." The blood that does not consent to the ritual cauldron does not consent, in its substrate, to the curse that requires the consent of the body. The curse, finding no purchase, declines. Harry had been holding, for the duration of the recipe, the small invisible mark of the halter on his own circulation. The mark held. The mark refused the curse. The curse, denied a substrate, dispersed against him into a fine green vapor that was, after a heartbeat, gone. Voldemort cast again. He cast a second time and a third. The curse, on each casting, found no purchase. Voldemort, on the 3rd casting, ceased to cast it. He spoke a different curse. The curse was a private one. The curse was the kind of curse a man invents in his own laboratory and gives a private name to. The curse came at Harry along the line of a black thread that had at its leading edge a small biting tooth. The line was sharp. The line was fast. The line was, however, a dueling curse of a school no older than the 1880s. And the halter, applied to its midpoint with the long-count precision of a practitioner who had been making the gesture in his sleep for 3 months, severed the thread. The biting end of the thread fell harmless on the grass. Voldemort stared. "What," he said again, "have you done?" Behind Voldemort in the grass, Pettigrew, who had been holding his half-bled wrist with the stump that had been a hand a quarter of an hour before, Pettigrew had remembered to start breathing again. Pettigrew, however, had not remembered to lower the silver hand his master had in a previous month given him. The silver hand on the stump had a will of its own. The silver hand had been, in fact, set by Voldemort with a private compulsion. Should the bearer ever, in word or thought, intend disloyalty, the silver hand would strangle him. The compulsion required in its substrate a master alive and integral. The substrate of Voldemort in the cauldron behind him was leaking. The compulsion, finding its anchor unstable, did the thing all unanchored compulsions do, which was to flail. The silver hand reached up. The silver hand closed on Pettigrew's throat. Pettigrew, who was already not in good order, attempted to pull the hand away with his good arm. The good arm was, by then, his only arm. The silver hand did not yield. Pettigrew's eyes went very wide. Pettigrew, in 12 seconds, was on the grass and was no longer breathing for a different reason than Cedric Diggory, 3 yards over, had stopped breathing. Voldemort in the duel did not look at his servant. Voldemort could not afford in the duel to look at his servant. He cast a 4th curse. The 4th curse passed wide. He cast a 5th. The 5th was less precise than the 2nd. He had begun, in his leaking body, to lose the small, fine adjustments of the spell hand that, in the duels of his career, had been his hallmark. Harry breathed. He had been told by the loremaster that he was not in the cemetery to cast the severance. He had been told, by Snape, that he was not to attempt the full rite in front of the Dark Lord. He had been told by the iron token at his sternum in the small private warmth that had reasserted itself on landing, that the night's work for him was the pin, the halter, and the survival. He cast the pin on Voldemort's wand hand. It was a small spell. It was the 2nd spell he had learned. He had cast it 10,000 times in 4 years. He had cast it under stress. He had cast it on chickens, on wooden posts, on a goblin who had volunteered for the practice, and on a single bear in a clearing in the high pass at the back of the Gringotts vaults. The pin was, by now, his most reliable instrument. The pin landed on Voldemort's wand hand at the instant the wand hand was raising for the 6th curse. The wand hand did not move. It did not lower. It did not raise. It did not in any direction oblige its owner. Voldemort, who in his long life had not been pinned by any practitioner of any school, looked at his own hand with an expression of pure naked incomprehension. The expression was, on the snake-pale face, briefly, almost human. Harry did not wait. He took a step back. The Triwizard Cup, the cup that had been a portkey, lay on the grass at his right where it had fallen when Pettigrew had killed Cedric. He stepped to it. He stooped. He hooked with his right foot the toe of Cedric's left shoe and drew the body to him in the long, slow drag the loremaster had taught him to perform with weight that he was not, at the moment, free to lift. He set his hand on the cup and on Cedric's wrist. He had, before he let the cup take them, one further courtesy to perform. He looked at Voldemort. "My lord," he said. The address was the old address of the practitioner to the condemned. It had been used in the courts of the order. It was, in its register, neither sarcasm nor honor. "I am not, by my tutelage, yet permitted to execute. I am not, by my tutelage, yet permitted to call you to formal account. I will, when I am permitted, find you. I will, when I am permitted, ask you to stand still for the right. I am giving you tonight my notice. The notice is in the old form. It is not, by the customs of my discipline, refusable. You will tonight return to your colleagues. You will, in the months following, gather what you intend to gather. You will, on a day not yet set, meet me in a place not yet chosen. I will, on that day, do the work. The work has been on the ledger of your name since the night you put a curse into my mother's parlor, and the ledger has not, in the intervening years, closed. You will, I hope, on the day, find the courtesy of standing still. The standing still does not, by my discipline, save you. The standing still permits the right to be cleaner. I am offering it to you, my lord, because you are owed, by old courtesy, hearing." Voldemort, with his wand hand still pinned and his body still leaking, opened his mouth. He did not, in the short interval he had, find the words. Harry, with the cup at his hand and Cedric's wrist beside it, said, "Take." The portkey took. He landed on the grass at the mouth of the maze with Cedric beside him and 1,000 people in the stands, and the band still playing the entrance fanfare. It had been playing for 15 minutes by mistake. The band stopped playing. The crowd, perceiving the second body, did the inward gasp Harry had heard before. He stood up. He set his free hand briefly on Cedric's shoulder. He said to anyone willing to hear it, "He killed Cedric. He has come back. He is not well, but he has come back." Bagman in the announcer's box did not have a sentence prepared for this. Bagman did not speak. Dumbledore from the staff stand was already moving. McGonagall was already on her feet. Snape was already on the field. The man who had been calling himself Moody was the first to reach Harry. He reached Harry the way a man reaches a fire he intends to put out by inserting himself. He set a heavy arm around Harry's shoulders and steered him, with the smooth efficiency of years of professional orating, towards the castle. He was speaking, in a low, gruff voice, about getting Harry inside, getting him to the hospital wing, getting him out of the public eye. Harry, who had been instructed by Snape that the third task was a portkey, and that the man not Moody had been in the stands at the second task with a glass eye that did not blink, did not let the arm hold. He shifted by the smallest fraction under the arm. He raised his right hand under his robe. He cast into the long muscle of the man not Moody's upper arm the halter. The arm let go. The arm could no longer not let go. The man not Moody, whose body had been polyjuiced from the moment Harry had met him, looked down at his own arm, then up at Harry, with the expression of a man whose long, careful operation had in 1 second ended. "You," he said. "I am sorry, Auror Moody," Harry said very politely. "You are not Auror Moody. You will in a moment be detained. The detention will not be by me. The detention will be by the gentleman walking up behind you." Snape, who had crossed the field on the long stride of a man who had calculated his angles, set the end of his wand against the back of the man not Moody's neck, and said a word so quietly that not even Harry, at 3 feet, caught it. The man not Moody fell forward onto his knees with the careful slowness of a man who has been allowed, by his captor's professional courtesy, to fall without injuring himself. The crowd did not, at this distance, see any of it. The crowd saw only that the boy who had come back from the cup with the dead Hufflepuff was now being led towards the school by Professors Snape and McGonagall, and that the headmaster, in the middle of the field, was speaking in a voice that had at once obtained the floor. That voice, Albus Dumbledore's voice, did the small careful work of saying, to 700 people on a midsummer's evening, that Cedric Diggory was dead, and that he had been killed by Lord Voldemort, and that Voldemort had come back, and that the world had changed in a manner it had not changed in 14 years, and that those who would refuse to accept this fact would be doing so against the considered word of the headmaster of Hogwarts. The crowd did not, that night, fully accept it. Some of them did. Some of them in the seats reserved for the ministry did not. The minister himself, Cornelius Fudge, did not. He stood up 3 minutes into Dumbledore's address and walked out of the stand with the dignity of a small dog leaving a kitchen in which a larger dog has settled. He went the next morning to the Daily Prophet. He gave them a quote. The quote ran on the front page 2 mornings later. The quote read, "The headmaster is mistaken. There is no reason for the public to be alarmed." The Wisengamot convened in emergency session 4 days later. It convened because the goblins had requested it. The request had come in the form of a formal embassy from Ragnarok himself. The embassy had been received by the chief warlock, Dumbledore, who had set the date of the session for the soonest hour the chamber could be opened. The minister had attempted to delay the session by procedural means. The procedural means had been, by Ragnarok's intervention, made to fail. On the morning of the session, The Wisengamot in its old robes sat in a half-circle in the deep chamber under the ministry, and Ragnarok stood at the center of the floor. He did not raise his voice. The chamber had been built in the 7th century to amplify a voice that did not raise. "Madam Bones," Ragnarok said, addressing the senior Auror who sat at the right of the chair. "Members of the Wisengamot, Chief Warlock, I have come by the right of treaty to speak of 3 things. The first is that on the night of the 24th of June, in a cemetery in Little Hangleton, a ritual was conducted by an agent of Lord Voldemort which resulted in the partial resurrection of his body. The ritual was conducted in a form whose specifications were known to my nation. The ritual was, by the participation of a person we have on our register, partially defeated. The body resurrected is leaking. The body resurrected is not, by any measurement we recognize, durable. The body resurrected will, in time and by considerable effort on his part, become more durable. The body resurrected will not, however, be what he intended it to be. That is the first thing." The chamber was silent. "The second thing," Ragnarok said, "is that the person on our register by whose participation the ritual was partially defeated is one Harry James Potter, a student of Hogwarts School, age 14. This person is, by the inheritance test conducted in our hall when he was 8 years of age, the heir of the line of practitioners outlawed by this body in 1498 under the Act of Suppression. He has, in the intervening 6 years, been under our tutelage. He has been so under treaty rights of long standing, of which we now formally apprise this body for the record. The treaty rights are not, by the constitutional terms of the Act of 83, justiciable in this chamber. The treaty rights stand. The nation requires of this body acknowledgment of the line, acknowledgment of the tutelage, and the formal, though not, at this time, the legal, recognition of the heir." There was a stirring among the older members of the Wisengamot. 2 of them in the back row were looking at one another. One of them, an abbot of the old family, was inclining his head very slightly as if to indicate that he had been suspecting this for years. The minister in his chair was the color of milk. "The third thing," Ragnarok said, "the Act of Suppression of 1498 is, on the records of this body, on the verge of its 6th century. The conditions under which it was passed, the political conditions, the cultural conditions, the dueling conditions of the late medieval, no longer obtain. The Lord Voldemort has, by his own conduct, returned to the kind of crime to which the practitioners of the line were, in their day, the formal response. The nation respectfully suggests to this body that the formal response remains available. The nation respectfully suggests that this body, on its own initiative, consider the conditions under which the Act of Suppression might, by the proper procedure, be revisited. The nation does not, at this time, require this. The nation suggests it. The suggestion is on the record." He inclined his head. "That is what I have come to say." He stepped back. The chamber did not, at first, find words. Dumbledore, in the chair of Chief Warlock, set his fingertips together and looked, for a long moment, at the Goblin King on the floor of his court. He looked, for a longer moment, at the ranked Wisengamot in front of him. He drew, with the careful precision of a man who had been preparing for this for some weeks, his breath. "Your Majesty," he said, "I thank you for your address. I will, with the consent of this body, refer the matter of the Act of Suppression to the Standing Committee for the Revision of Antique Law. I will, on my own authority, acknowledge the line, acknowledge the tutelage, and acknowledge the heir. I will not in this chamber comment on the events of the 24th of June beyond what your Majesty has placed on the record. I will permit those events to speak in time as they will. Minister." Fudge did not respond. "Minister." "Headmaster, I cannot. This is, Minister. There will in due course be a debate. You may wish to be prepared for it." Fudge sat down. In a small chamber off the Great Hall, Harry waited with Snape. He had been called as a witness to the session. He had not in the event been called to speak. He had heard through the small heavy door the king's address. He had heard the silence that followed. He had heard the headmaster's reply. Snape, beside him on the bench, did not speak. Snape was reading, with the slow, methodical attention of a man for whom the day had been a long one and not over yet, a small printed sheet that one of the goblin clerks had handed him at the door. The sheet was the agenda of the next session, 2 weeks off. The next session would not, by any reading of the agenda, be quiet. He folded the sheet. He put it in his inner pocket. "Mr. Potter, sir, you did in the cemetery what we asked of you. You did not do more. You did not do less. Your loremaster will, I expect, be pleased." "Yes, sir. Your headmaster is in the chamber above us doing the work he has been preparing for 50 years to do. He is, by his own private measure, doing it well. I am not, by my own private measure, in a position to compliment him further than that. You will, however, find that he supports you. You will find this difficult. You will, in time, find it less difficult. Yes, sir. And Mr. Potter, sir, in a place not yet chosen, you will be required to perform the full rite. The full rite has 4 phases. You have been taught 3 of them. The 4th phase will be taught to you this summer in the long form by your loremaster. The 4th phase requires that the practitioner know, in advance of the working, the name of the practitioner's witnesses. The witnesses will, by the form of the rite, be in the chamber. You will, in the chamber, be observed. You will be observed by your Goblin King, by the members of the Wisengamot in session, and by myself. There will, by then, be no further need of secrecy. Do you understand?" "I do, sir." "Good. Go up and find your friends. The girl has been waiting for you for an hour. The boy has been waiting for 2. Harry went up. Hermione, at the door, did not throw her arms around him. She sat, with very deliberate restraint, one hand at his elbow. She held it there for a moment. Ron, behind her, said, "All right then, mate." And the "all right then" was a sentence with the years they had had in it. Above the ministry, the sky was clear. Across the country, in a manor house in the West Country, Lord Voldemort, in a body that had not stopped leaking since the night of the cemetery, sat in a high chair and considered the small dropped fact that one of his Horcruxes had, at the moment of the failed resurrection, by sympathy through a thread he had not known until that night was a thread, fractured. He did not, at this point, know which one. He would, by the autumn, know which one. He would, in the meantime, consider in the slow, careful private register he had developed over 50 years, what to do about a 14-year-old boy who had served him formal notice by the customs of an order that he had been taught in his own private studies as a young man no longer existed. He had been a clever boy. He had remained, by his own opinion, a clever man. He had been that night addressed by an older clerk. He had heard the address. He had felt the wand hand pinned. He had felt his own body refuse him, for the first time in his long life, in the form he had paid for it to take. The named feeling in him that summer was a feeling he had not before allowed himself. He set it aside. He set it aside, however, less easily than the boy in Surrey, 400 miles away, set his own feelings aside on the same long evenings. He began, on the 7th of July, to draft a plan. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The rite at the ministry steps. The summer between Harry's 4th and 5th years was the longest of his life and the shortest of the loremaster's career. They had been given, by the calendar of events, perhaps 12 weeks to do what the line, in its old form, would have given a practitioner 4 years to do. The 4th spell was the largest of the 12. It had no English name. The loremaster called it, in his own register, the Recension, and in the formal sentences of the order's books it was called the Velorum Recension, after the constellation under which the order's first formal court had sat in the year 931. The Recension was a 4-phase working. The first phase was the naming. The second was the account. The third was the severance. The fourth was the pin, applied not to the body but to the seam of the soul through which the body had been animated. Each phase had been, by previous instruction, taught to Harry as a separate spell. The bringing of them together into a single working was, the lore-master said, the year's work. You have, the lore-master said on the first morning in the slate room under Gringotts, cast each of the 4 phases in earnest. You have not cast them in sequence. The sequence is the practitioner's hardest discipline. Each phase on its own requires of you a count of breath. The sequence requires of you the count of breath through all 4 without interruption. The body that breaks the count between Phase 2 and Phase 3 is the body that is, by the end of Phase 3, on the floor. Do you follow? Yes, sir. The recension also has, in the moment of its closing, a feedback. The feedback is older than I am. The feedback is older than the order. The feedback is, perhaps, older than the substrate from which the order drew. The feedback will, in the closing of the working, find every fragment of the subject that the subject has in life set elsewhere. The feedback will, in the closing, address those fragments. The address is, in our discipline, called the cascade. The cascade is the part of the recension that, in the days when our order conducted public executions, drew the witnesses. The cascade is visible, in a manner the rest of the rite is not. The cascade, applied to a dark lord who has set fragments of his soul in physical objects, and we have, by reasonable inference from your headmaster's research, established that this dark lord has set such fragments, will produce the most extensive cascade the order has seen since the trial of the Witch of Endor's grandnephew in 1281. You will, in the closing, be the conductor of it. You will, in the closing, not be permitted to flinch. Do you follow? Yes, sir. Good. We begin with the breath. They worked through the summer. They worked 12 hours a day. By the end of the first month, Harry could hold the sequence of the first 3 phases through a single, uninterrupted breath of the long count. By the end of the second month, he could hold all 4. By the end of the third month, he could hold the 4 under physical strain that the lore-master, with the cold, practical hand of a teacher who did not soften his curriculum, increased each morning. In the 3rd week of August, Ragnarok came down into the slate room. He had not been in the slate room for over a year. He inclined his head, by the deeper inclination the king reserved for practitioners of the line, and stood and watched while Harry, for the 3rd time that morning, worked the full recension on a goat that had been provided by a small farm in Wales which had a long arrangement with the nation. The goat, old, arthritic in its last months by ordinary measure, did not by the working suffer. The recension, properly conducted, did not. The goat was upright at Phase 1. The goat was upright at Phase 2, and looked, briefly, attentive in the manner of an old creature being addressed in a familiar language. The goat folded its legs at Phase 3. The folding was, in the goat's own register, courteous, as if the goat had decided to lie down. The goat at Phase 4 ceased to be in the body, and the body on the slate was no more lifeless than the body of a goat that has been put down by a kind hand in the back of a field. The lore-master, who had a long-standing arrangement with the farm, took the body away. It would be used. Nothing was wasted in the discipline. The farm had been paid. Ragnarok stayed for the 7th repetition. He stayed for the 8th. He did not, during the working, speak. He is ready, the lore-master said in the goblin tongue in the long pause after the 9th. Almost, Ragnarok said. He is ready in the body. The mind is one further step. Yes, Ragnarok came forward. He stood before Harry, who was on his feet on the slate with the long count at its lowest depth and the breath at 4. Heir of the line, Ragnarok said, I will tell you one further thing. Before you cast the recension on the man, you will, by the customs of our discipline, look him in the face. The face will not, by then, be the face of a child's bogey. The face will be the face of a man. You will, in the looking, be required to recognize him as a man. The recension is not refusable. The recognition is. You will, by the recognizing, take on the work as something other than the abstract removal of a problem. You will, by the recognizing, take on the work as the ending of a person. The order in its long history did not flinch from this. The order indeed made it the central discipline of the rite. There is no recension without the recognition. The recension absent the recognition is, in our books, the rite of an assassin. We are not assassins. We are practitioners of the line. We recognize. We then do the work. Yes, sir. You may, in the moment, find that you cannot. You may find that the recognition arrests you. The arresting is permitted. The arresting is, in fact, encouraged. The arresting is the point. 3 of my own ancestors in their own working years arrested mid-recension and let the subject live. The nation did not, in those cases, criticize them. The nation supported them. The recension is a working you may, at any point in its execution, decline. You will not, in the declining, lose face. You will, in the declining, prove that you remain a practitioner of the line and not a tool of it. Yes, sir. That is all I have to say. The rest is what the lore master has taught you. We will, in the autumn, give you space. We will, in the autumn, watch from a distance. We will not intervene. When the time comes, we will be in the chamber and our presence will be the formal acknowledgement of the witness. We will, if the working concludes, walk down the steps with you. The walking down is part of the rite. We have in our books the schedule of who walks where. You will know on the day. Goodbye until then. He inclined his head and left. Harry returned to Hogwarts in September. The school, in the month since June, had not been the school he had left. The Daily Prophet had spent the summer printing pieces, sometimes daily, that ran in the general key of Harry Potter is, by the evidence available to this paper, an unreliable witness whose story of Lord Voldemort's return has not been corroborated, and whose presence in the cemetery on the night of the Triwizard has, in this paper's opinion, never been adequately explained. The pieces did not, in their long campaign, mention the Goblin Nation's testimony at the emergency Wisengamot session. The pieces did not mention the act of suppression. The pieces did not mention the line. The pieces had been arranged by various hands in various ministry offices to avoid the parts of the record that did not, in the minister's view, serve the minister. Harry walked through the corridors of his 5th year with the small, steady attention of a man who had been called a liar in print for a summer and had not, in his discipline, the leisure to mind. He answered when spoken to. He did not, on his own initiative, address. He sat in his lessons. He took his notes. He attended, in his evenings, to the additional readings the lore master had sent by token. The readings were the case files of the Order's last 50 years of active practice. The case files were sober reading. The case files had been chosen by the lore master to make Harry less afraid of his own work and more afraid of the things his work was, in its turn, the answer to. The 5th year was, on the surface, calm. Below the surface it was the autumn of the war. In October the new defense professor, a small woman in a pink cardigan, with the dimensions of a toad and the patience of an interrogator, was installed by the ministry. She made it her business to be present at Harry's lessons. She wrote in a clipboard her observations. She wrote in the small, steady hand of a clerk the words, "Subject docile, subject competent." Subject does not, in the lesson observed today, demonstrate the conduct the headmaster has alleged. The observations went by various routes to the minister. The minister read them. The minister was reassured. The lore master at the end of October sent by token a brief message. Umbridge is a distraction. Permit the distraction. Do not in her classes perform. Harry did not perform. He did the homework. He did not, when she set him the small, humiliating tasks that other students would have refuse them. He did them in silence, with the steady, polite hand of a boy who had been taught not to volunteer information. He did not have to volunteer. He sat in her detentions with a quill that wrote in his own blood the lines she required him to write. The blood, after the second night, did not in fact open the back of his hand the way Umbridge's quill was designed to. The blood by the halter simply went into the quill. The back of his hand was unmarked. He did not tell her this. He let her continue to think she was doing the work she imagined she was doing. The line the lore master had instructed did not waste itself on the wrong target. In November, Voldemort began to move. He moved at first only in the small intermediary ways: the raid on a ministry warehouse for a piece of equipment, the recruitment of a former Death Eater whose name had been struck from the rolls in 1981, the bribery of a low clerk to extract the routing schedule of a particular evidence locker. In December, he moved more openly. A village in Cornwall was burned. The ministry, in print, declared the fire a faulty flue. In January, 2 Aurors who had been making inconvenient public statements were killed in what was, in print, called an accident. In February, the Department of Mysteries was, by means subsequently unclear, breached, and a Hall of Prophecy was entered by unauthorized hands, though nothing by the ministry's later account was taken. In March, Voldemort's leaking body had stabilized. The stabilization had cost him 3 more sacrifices and the partial draining of one of the older Horcruxes. The Horcrux had not, in the drainage, broken, but it had been reduced. Voldemort knew, by then, the catalogue of his own losses. He knew which Horcrux had fractured in June. He knew, by inference, that his remaining anchors were 5. He set on the calendar of his private rage a date at which he would move openly against the ministry and against the line. The date he set was the 18th of May. In late April, Snape, at the end of a potions lesson, Harry did not deserve to be detained Harry and said, in the empty laboratory with the door closed, the 18th. The ministry by mid-afternoon. He will assault the building from the front. The Aurors will not, on the day, hold him. The minister has been so thoroughly persuaded by his own pet professor that the Aurors have been redeployed away from the front lobby on the day, by order. The Wisengamot will, by chance, be in session in the deep chamber below. The headmaster will be at the session. You will be summoned by the headmaster on the morning of the 17th on a pretext I will not in this corridor name. You will permit the summons. You will go. The loremaster will be at the ministry on the 18th by a route I will not name. You will, on the steps, do what you have been taught to do. Do you understand? Yes, sir. And Mr. Potter, sir. I have in the past 5 years watched you. I have in the past 5 years said very little to you. I have in the past 5 years treated you in public in the manner the headmaster required me to. I have not, in any of those years, doubted what you were. I have in the past 5 years been in my own private register, proud of the line that you carry. The pride is not in the order of public emotion. I am telling you privately. I am not after the 18th going to be in a position to tell you. Do not in any of the years to come doubt that you were watched, and that the watching was a friendly watching by at least one observer who recognized the alphabet of your discipline. Goodbye, Mr. Potter. Goodbye, sir. The morning of the 18th of May was warm. Harry, at the breakfast table, drank a glass of water and ate a single piece of bread. He did not speak. Hermione, beside him, did not speak. She had been by long arrangement, given the night before by Harry's quiet hand on her wrist the small notice of the day. She had not asked further. She had set that morning a piece of toast on his plate and a clean handkerchief beside it. The handkerchief was clean. She had explained the day before, because handkerchiefs in the books of the order had been, on the day of a working, clean. Harry, who had read the books, had inclined his head. Ron, on his other side, was reading a Quidditch broadsheet without seeing it. Ron had not asked. Ron's hand on the table between them was lying flat. Ron's hand, halfway through breakfast, slid 2 inches and rested for the count of 2 breaths against the back of Harry's hand. Then Ron returned to his broadsheet. McGonagall came along the table at the end of breakfast and spoke a low sentence to Harry. The sentence said, "The headmaster requires you in the entrance hall in 10 minutes. Bring nothing." Harry brought at his sternum the iron token. He brought in his sleeve the holly wand. He brought in his mouth the breath. He met Dumbledore in the entrance hall. He left, by the gates, with Dumbledore at his side and McGonagall behind him, by a flue that had been arranged by a route he was not consulted about. He came up out of the flue in the ministry's atrium at 5 minutes after 11 in the morning. The atrium was emptier than it ordinarily was. The fountain was running. The morning light, through the high east windows, lay in long bands on the marble. There were 3 oars at the door. The minister was in his office on the floor above. The Wisengamot was, by the agenda Snape had described, in deep session 2 floors below. The clerks were at their desks, and many of them, in the morning of the 18th of May, had decided to take an early lunch by means none of them had quite, in their own minds, been able to explain to themselves. Harry walked to the steps of the front entrance. Dumbledore stayed at the lift down to the chamber. He had been instructed by Ragnarok that the steps were the steps of the practitioner alone. He inclined his head. He stepped back. The lift took him down. Harry came out of the front doors onto the wide stone steps of the Ministry of Magic. The steps led down to the small public square in front of the building, which was, on the morning of the 18th, paved in long sun. Across the square a fountain played. To either side of the square the oar posts stood, ostensibly manned, by men who had been redeployed by an order that one of them, 3 days before, had thought irregular enough to write down in his private notebook. He stood on the 3rd step from the top. He set his feet. He breathed. He waited. He waited for 9 minutes. The waiting had been, in his discipline, the longest part. The loremaster had taught him that the waiting was the practitioner's first patience. The waiting was the part where the body of the practitioner taught itself in real time that it could, in fact, wait. At 11 minutes past 11, a swirl of black began at the center of the square. The swirl rose. The swirl became, in 3 seconds, the long, lean, black-cloaked shape of a Dark Lord, and at his back, in the next 3 seconds, 12 of his Death Eaters. The 12 fanned in a half-circle behind him. The fountain at the center of the square, with a small, heartbroken pop, stopped playing. Lord Voldemort, in his second body, looked up at the steps. He saw the boy. He looked at the boy. He looked at the steps. He looked at the door behind the boy. He looked at the boy again. He did not, on the look, smile. He was past smiling. He was past, by long discipline, the kind of small theatrical face he had used in his first life to intimidate weaker men. "Potter," he said. "My lord." The address was, in the chamber under their feet, audible. Ragnarok had, by his own arrangement, set in the steps a long, thin charm that carried the voices of the steps down to the deep chamber. The Wisengamot in session lifted its head. The headmaster at the side of the chamber inclined his ear. The minister on the second-floor balcony of his own office came to the rail and looked down and saw. "You have summoned me," Voldemort said. "I have given you notice. The notice was in the old form 11 months ago. I have come. You have. Then we proceed." Voldemort raised his wand. He cast. The killing curse was, in him, by long practice, the most reliable instrument in his catalogue. It crossed the 8 yards from the center of the square to the lower step at the speed of a man's voice. It struck the boy on the 3rd step from the top, where the boy had been standing. The boy was still standing there. The curse against the boy did not strike. The curse against the boy dispersed. The dispersal had, in the bright sun on the marble, a small green halo at the edges of the boy's outline. The halo did not last more than a heartbeat. The boy did not move. Voldemort cast a second time. He cast more carefully. He cast with the small private adjustment of a man who, in a previous engagement, had cast the same curse 3 times and had failed 3 times, and who had, in the month since, considered the failure and adjusted for what he believed to have been the variable. The variable he had adjusted for was the distance. The distance today was 8 yards. He believed, in the small private record he kept of his own working, that the closer engagement would not yield the same dispersal. The second curse, against the boy, did not strike. It dispersed in the same green halo. He cast a third time. The third curse passed not against the boy but around the boy in the small specific way that water in a stream passes around a stone whose presence in the streambed it has accepted. It passed the boy on the right of him and continued and struck the door behind him and discolored the door. The door did not, in any other sense, mind. Voldemort at the center of the square did the small, involuntary motion of a man who had used, on 3 consecutive castings, the most reliable instrument in his catalogue, and on whom the catalogue had, in his own square, declined to be relied on. He lowered his wand. He raised it again in a new posture for a different curse. He did not, on the new curse, get to the end of the gesture. Harry, on the 3rd step from the top, raised his right hand. The hand went to the 7th position, the position of the carpenter laying down a chisel on a board he intends to mark. The breath went to 4. He spoke, in the slate language he had spoken in his 9th year, and his 11th and his 13th, the first syllable. The first phase of the recension was the naming. The naming did not strike. The naming reached past the man in the square to the substrate of him, and called him, by the old true name that the man had been given on the 3rd day of his life in his mother's arms, before he had been left in the orphanage and renamed and renamed and renamed again. The name was a single short word in an English no longer spoken. The name in the substrate settled. The man in the square did not, by the settling, fall. The man in the square did, by the settling, lower his wand a second time. The lowering was, in the working, the first formal courtesy of the rite. The subject named gives the practitioner the floor. The Wisengamot in the chamber below heard the syllable through the charm in the steps. They heard also the small low intake of breath of the Goblin King at the rear of the chamber, who, on hearing the syllable, inclined his head by the deepest inclination of the day. Harry breathed the second count. He spoke the second syllable. The second phase was the account. The account was, in the form of the rite, the longest spoken part of the working. The account listed the names of those whom the subject had killed. It listed them by name. The names in the rite were not read off a sheet. The names rose out of the substrate of the subject at the calling of the substrate. The account, properly conducted, was therefore not the practitioner's accusation. It was the subject's own confession, drawn from him in the language of the substrate and read into the air of the working chamber. The names in the rite cast on the 18th of May were 173. The names began with a Hepzibah Smith and an Olive Hornby and a Tom Riddle Sr. and a man named Frank Bryce. The names continued with a Marlene McKinnon, a Dorcas Meadows, a Benji Fenwick. They continued with a Gideon Pruett and a Fabian Pruett, brothers and Aurors, and with a long sequence of muggles whose names Voldemort had not in life troubled himself to learn. The names in the rite knew themselves. The account spoke them. The account did not pause. The names continued. The chamber below heard. The Wisengamot in its session did not interrupt. The minister on the balcony above gripped the rail and did not let go. The account, by the 84th name, named a James Potter. By the 85th, a Lily Potter. By the 87th, a Cedric Diggory. Harry breathed. The breath did not break. He had been told by the loremaster on the 2nd day of August that he would, at the naming of his father, be permitted by the form to break the count, and that he was, by his own working discipline, instructed not to. He did not. The breath held. The account at the 173rd name closed. He spoke the 3rd syllable. The 3rd phase was the severance. The severance, in the rite of the order, was the only phase the practitioner had ever cast in earnest in the past 400 years. Harry had cast it once, on a soul fragment in a chamber under his own school at the age of 11. He had cast it once, on a grindalow under the Black Lake at the age of 13. He had cast it twice in earnest. He cast it now, on a dark lord in the morning light on a Tuesday in May. The severance separated. The severance did not, in its working, tear. The severance moved along an existing seam in the subject, with the precision of a butcher's apprentice who had, in his apprentice years, been taught his joints. The seam in this subject was old. The seam in this subject had been deliberately created by the subject himself. In his late 20s, it had been the line along which he had taken from his own body in the year 1943, the first fragment of his own soul, in order to put that fragment elsewhere. The severance in the right found this old seam. The severance opened it. The body in the square, standing, did not fall. The fragment of soul still in the body, however, came up out of him in the small protesting smoke that such fragments make, and the smoke rose 3 yards into the morning air, and the smoke wore, at its leading edge, the face the account had named. The face wore, in the morning, the expression of a man who had, for 50 years, prepared for a death he had been clever enough to make impossible, and who was discovering, in the last minute of his life, that he had been clever in the local idiom of a small set of customs that did not, in the longer customs of the substrate, count. Heir breathed the 4th count. He spoke the 4th syllable. The 4th phase was the pin, applied not to the body of the subject. The body had, by this point in the working, become irrelevant, but to the seam of the soul fragment in the air. The pin on the soul held. The closing of the recension, the loremaster had told him on the last morning of August, would produce the cascade. The cascade, properly worked, found the other fragments. The cascade, properly worked, was visible to the practitioner. The cascade was not the practitioner's act. The cascade was the substrate's act. The substrate had been waiting for 50 years to find the other fragments. The cascade went. There was in the chamber below the steps no perceptible sound. There was in the square no perceptible sound. There was, however, in 5 places across the British Isles, the simultaneous fracture of objects. In a small derelict house in Little Hangleton, on the floor of a parlor, a black stone in a gold ring crazed across its center with a thin, pale line, and after a heartbeat, broke in 2. In a vault under Gringotts that had, since the year 1937, belonged to the family Lestrange, a small gold cup with 2 handles, on a shelf, audibly cracked along the lip. The crack widened. The cup, with a small private noise, came apart at the seam. In an abandoned cave on the coast of the southwest, in a basin half full of an old potion, a small heavy gold locket lay at the bottom of the basin, and at the same instant of the morning, the case of the locket split along the line of its hinge. In a high room in the castle on the northern coast that was, by long lease, in the possession of one Rowena Ravenclaw and her descendants, a small silver diadem with a sapphire at its center dropped, by the sympathy of an instant, from the shelf on which it had been concealed and fell to the floor, and the sapphire cracked. And in the body of a great snake, 2 miles outside Little Hangleton, which had been waiting at the heel of its master through the morning by long arrangement, the small dark anchor at the heart of it released. The snake, without ceremony, became a snake. The cascade closed. The smoke in the air, 3 yards above the square, dispersed. The body in the square, no longer animated by the fragment that had been pinned, folded at the knees and then at the waist with the small private courtesy of a body that had been instructed by an older clerk to fold cleanly. The body lay on its back on the pavement. The body was, by every measure available to the morning, a body and not a man. The face was the face the account had named. The face was, in the sun, almost peaceful in the manner of a face that has been recognized at last, and is no longer required to perform. In the square, in the half-circle, the 12 Death Eaters had not, in the working of the rite, moved. They had been pinned at the second syllable, in the small generous expansion of the working that Harry had not, in his preparation, intended, but the substrate had, in the closing, performed on its own initiative. They stood now in the sun and could not move. They would, by the timing of the rite, remain so for a precise 3 minutes after the closing, by which time the aurors who had been redeployed by ministry order would, by the better instinct of their own captain, have redeployed themselves back, and would have been able to take the 12 into custody without a duel. The Wisengamot in the chamber below did not, at the closing of the rite, immediately speak. The session had heard, through the steps, the entire account. The session had heard the 73rd name and the 173rd, and the names of every auror, and the names of every muggle, and the names of 2 of its own children. The session had heard at the 3rd syllable the severance in the language no member of the chamber had in his own life expected to hear cast in his own building. The session had heard the cascade. The session, by long parliamentary discipline, took half a minute at the closing to find its own voice again. The chief warlock on the bench set down his gavel. He did not lift it. "Madam Bones," he said. "Headmaster, I move, Madam Bones, the formal repeal of the Act of Suppression of 1498, on the grounds, as set out by His Majesty the Goblin King in this chamber's emergency session of June last, that the conditions under which the Act was passed no longer obtain, and that the line which the Act suppressed has, today, in the conduct of one of its heirs on the steps of this ministry, performed a service to the realm that no other discipline available to this body was, by its own confession, capable of performing. The motion stands." "Seconded," said Madam Bones, who had been at the rail through every name. "All in favor." The chamber, in a single voice that included even the elderly members in the back row who had voted, in their grandfathers' chambers with their grandfathers, said aye. "Carried," said Dumbledore. "Madam Bones, the Act is, by motion, repealed. The senior auror's office is, on the morning of the next working day, instructed to draft the implementing regulations. The Goblin Embassy is, on the morning of the next working day, formally notified. The line is, by motion of this body, restored to legal standing. The heir of the line, who is at present on the steps above us, is, by motion of this body, formally acknowledged. The motion stands." "Seconded," said an abbot in the back row who had been waiting 40 years. "Carried." The Goblin King, at the rear of the chamber, inclined his head by the deepest inclination he had given the building in any of his recorded visits. The inclination was, by long custom, the formal acceptance of the Act. He turned and went up to the steps. He came up out of the lift on the ground floor of the atrium, and he crossed the marble in his own small measured gait, and he came out of the front doors of the ministry into the bright sun, and he came to the 3rd step from the top, where the boy stood with his right hand at his side now, and the breath, at last, returning by long careful increments toward a normal pace. Behind Ragnarok in the lift, the loremaster had come up. Behind the loremaster, 6 members of the Goblin Honor Guard. Behind them, by the lift on the 2nd floor, Dumbledore. Behind Dumbledore, McGonagall and Snape. Behind them, by the long stairwell, the senior auror's office, 6 aurors led by the senior auror herself, with the minister who was being escorted in a manner that was not precisely arrest, but was no longer precisely command. Ragnarok stopped at the 3rd step. He inclined his head. "Heir of the line, Your Majesty, the rite is concluded. It is concluded, Your Majesty. You have today done what no practitioner of the line has done in this country in 400 years. You have done it cleanly. You have done it in front of witnesses. You have done it without grievance and without the small private vanity that in the rite the books warn against. The nation is honored. The line is reinstated. The chamber behind us has by act of legislation acknowledged the line. The line walks the world again. Your Majesty, there is one further part of the rite. You have been taught it, the walking down. Yes, sir. Ragnar inclined his head. He turned. He went down the steps with the lore master at his left shoulder and Harry at his right. Behind them came the honor guard. Behind the honor guard came Dumbledore, then McGonagall, then Snape. At the bottom of the steps the small public square was, by the timing of the rite, beginning to fill. The clerks who had taken their early lunch were returning. The aurors, by the better instinct of their captain, were emerging from their posts. The Wisengamot, by the session's close, was coming up out of the chamber and standing at the edge of the square in a long, quiet half-circle. The body of the man in the square had been, by the cascade, accepted by the marble. It lay where it had fallen. It did not, by the customs of the rite, require further handling. The body would be collected in due course by the Department of Mysteries, who would, on the next Monday, conduct the small private inquest of a death they did not, by any of their procedures, recognize but were nevertheless required to record. At the bottom step Harry paused. He set, for one breath, his hand against the marble. The marble was warm. He had been told by the lore master that the marble would be warm. The steps had been present at the working, and the steps would remember. He stepped off the last step into the square. Hermione, who had come by means he did not at first understand but later understood by means of a sealed note she had been carrying since dawn, was at the edge of the square. Ron was beside her. They did not, at the sight of him, run. They stood. They waited. He walked to them. He did not, in the walking, hurry. The named feeling at last in him was relief. He named it in his own private interior for the first time in a year. He did not, in the naming, weaken. He felt it settle in his chest, behind the iron token, in the long, warm place that the line, by long discipline, had taught him to keep. Hermione, when he reached her, did not throw her arms around him. She set her hand very deliberately at his elbow, and she held it there for the count of 3 breaths. Ron, beside her, said, "All right then, mate." "All right, Ron." He looked at the square. He looked at the Wisengamot at the edges. He looked at the minister who would, by the end of the week, no longer be the minister. He looked at Dumbledore, who was at the top of the steps, with the long, careful, private face of a man who had been a long time in his own profession, and had, today, learned a thing about it that he had not previously known he would, in his lifetime, be permitted to learn. He looked at the Goblin King. Ragnar inclined his head, by the small private inclination of a king to a colleague. Harry inclined his back, by the small private inclination of a colleague who had, that morning on the 3rd step from the top, become one. Above them the high blue of a May morning sat in the long bands of cloud, and a fox, somewhere along the line of the building, came out from behind a hedge and looked up at the small crowd in the square for a long, careful moment, and went back where it had come from. Foxes know things. Foxes had today taken a Tuesday morning at the Ministry of Magic seriously. They would, in their own register, take it seriously for years. The line walked the world again. Chapter 6 End.